Hello guys, welcome to Soul Fiction. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was the Kryptonian Shinobi? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. Sunborn in the Hidden Leaf. The scaffold was all wrong. Naruto didn't know the carpentry words for it, he just knew the sound. Most mornings, the market on Dragonfly Street was a cheerful racket, vendors hawking pickles, kids chasing one another around vegetable crates. Someone beating dust from a rug while an old man argued with a cat. But today, under all that, a hollow clatter threaded the noise like a lie. Nails stuttered in their boards. A rope rasped too fast against a pole. The thin metal couplings at the scaffold's joints chimed, high, brittle, impatient. He was already moving when the first plank gave. Hey, move. Naruto shouldered into the crowd, palms out. The urgency in his voice scattering people faster than words could. A vendor shouted about cabbages. Someone else cursed. Naruto didn't wait. He hit the scaffolds, shade at a sprint and drove a shoulder into the load-bearing post just as the top crossbeam tilted. Wood bucked. The whole thing lurched, a metal bucket pitched free, and a painter yelped as his ladder slipped. Naruto planted both feet, leaned in, and kept the world from falling. The beam pressed into his shoulder like a giant's hand. Wood bit his skin through the orange jacket, and the scent of old sap and dust filled his mouth. Sunlight slid across the alley like a tide and Naruto felt it hit the back of his neck, warmth soaking into him, quiet but certain, a hum along the lines of his body. He let a little of it in. No more than a breath, enough for strength without the slip of control that could split the post like firewood. The plank groaned and steadied. The painter dangled a moment from the ladder and then a big man with flour on his apron caught him. A cheer went up that Naruto ducked away from because praise did strange things inside him, too, and he didn't trust the heat in his chest not to flare when it was asked to. He eased the beam into true and stepped back, rolling his shoulder to hide the dent he'd left. It had only bent a little. It wouldn't show if you didn't know where to look. Kid. The painter stumbled toward him, breathless and paint dappled. How did you eat breakfast? Naruto said, grinning because it was easier, because grins covered things, because grins bounced off people like stones skipping. It makes you strong. He saluted the cat, who looked unpersuaded, and then slipped away before anyone could put hands on him like he was a heroine. Feel the heat still banked under his skin. Outside the alley, morning had come fully. Roof tiles flashed like fish scales with dew, and the sun was clean and high above Konoha's walls. Naruto took to the rooftops on habit. The village unfolding beneath him with each leap. Lanterns coiled along eaves like sleeping serpents, laundry strung across alleys like banners, the Hokage monument watching Fr. The mountain with its carved faces and waiting eyes. Every jump he tested the line between fast and too fast. His muscles wanted to pour. The sun teased him. Come on, it said from every warm tile, from every golden edge. You know what you are. You know what you could do if you stopped pretending to be light and let yourself be fire. He landed on the academy roof and lay on his back for a minute. The tiles warm against his shoulder blades, eyes closed to the sky. Wind tugged his whisker marks and rifled his hair. He let the light pool under his skin and thought of nothing. No exams. No teachers who looked at him like a problem to solve. No quiet that waited for him when the grins ran out. Just warmth, and the steady thrum of the village living because everybody agreed to. Something old stirred in him at the edge of sleep, an ember the size of a mountain. Careful, brat. The voice wasn't words so much as a push of feeling, dry amusement edged with teeth. If you bask like a lizard, you'll forget to keep your claws in. Naruto cracked an eye. Morning to you too, he whispered. He didn't look for the fox. It was never a place to look at. It was a space you felt like pressure. Before a storm or the way a crowd leaned. You saved a painter, Kurama said, the rumble of it shaking some memory of stone. And didn't level the block. That's improvement. Thanks. He meant it. The beast rarely offered compliments. I'm getting better at not being obvious. Better doesn't mean good. A huff, almost a laugh. Do what you want today, but remember, you have teeth. Don't bite the village. Like I could ever forget that. Naruto rolled up to his feet in one smooth movement and jogged toward the stairwell. Iruka was waiting in the hallway outside the classroom, leaning against the wall. LL with his arms folded and a smile tucked into one corner of his mouth. His hair was still damp from a too early bath, and he had that look, proud even when he was pretending to scold, the one that made Naruto's chest feel too tight. "You're early," Iruka said. "You say that like it's suspicious." Naruto kept his mouth from making jokes about scaffolds by immeasurable effort. "I can be early." Iruka tipped his head toward the window where sunlight painted a bright slice across the floor. "Did anything interesting happen on the way?" Naruto looked at him. Iruka looked back. The silence saw it more than whatever Naruto might have made up. Iruka sighed and tapped his grade book against his shoulder. "Try to keep whatever that was out of your assignment introductions," he said dryly. "Mizu. He will have a fit if the class starts improvising rescue missions as rhetorical devices." "Mizuki can fit himself into a bucket," Naruto muttered, and caught the look. "Metaphorically. With paint." Iruka's mouth quirked. "Go on. Today's team placements. You'll want a good seat." The classroom smelled like chalk and pencil shavings and 100 different lunches waiting to happen. Naruto bounced into his usual spot, elated and a little nauseous. Today they'd put him with other people and expect the three of them to somehow become a line. He sprawled over his seat back and traded insults with Hiba until Shikamaru arrived half asleep and lazily ruthless about it. Sakura pretended not to notice Naruto. Sasuke didn't pretend. He didn't notice anyone at all, the weight of that silence dense as a stone in a riverbed. Hinata slipped in with her books hugged to her chest, hair tucked behind one ear to show the little curve of her earlobe where the sunlight caught it. Naruto's grin wobbled. She glanced past him once, quick as a dart, and then sat 2 rows back. He told himself not to look again and looked anyway. Hinata stared determinedly at her empty desk. Her cheeks were pink like the first light off snow. Iruka called names. People made those noises they make when things don't go their way. Oh no. Seriously. Naruto put both hands flat on his desk and waited for the joke. "Team 7, Iruka said. And the classroom seemed to lean forward. Uchiha Sasuke, Haruno Sakura, Uzumaki Naruto. Oh, Sasuke didn't flinch. Sakura made a small sound like she'd bitten into something too sour and was determined to enjoy it anyway. Naruto laughed because if he didn't laugh he might let the other sound out, the private one in his chest, the relief that felt too large for his skin. This was a team. It had his name in it. That was not small. He snuck one look up. Hinata was smiling to herself, unobtrusive and bright, like a lantern behind paper. Kakashi took his time arriving because of course he did. When it was well past lunch and Naruto had stomped through 2 speeches and 4 threats about deserts and vengeance, the door slid open with an apologetic squeal and a tall man with gravity-defying silver hair and the laziest eye Naruto had ever seen leaned in to examine them like strawberries. Interesting, bruised, possibly delicious. "Yo," Kakashi said with the air of someone for whom time was an optional accessory. "Team 7, you look troublesome already." They met him on the roof because he had a flair for theater, and Naruto's stomach did that eager swoop as the sun soaked into the tiles, the warmth making its way through his soles. Kakashi sat on the railing as if falling would be a learning experience worth having and asked them to introduce themselves in a way that told Naruto he already knew too much. Sakura said her name like an apology and her dream like a hope she'd learned to armor. Sasuke said Uchiha like a knife, and the air cooled around it. Naruto said Uzumaki like someone setting a flag. "I like ramen," he said, because the other bits were large and fragile and not for rooftops. "I'm going to be Hokage," he added, because that one was for rooftops. "Because you had to tell the sky and make it carry the vow for you." Kakashi pulled the mask of his face down in a smile you could hear more than see. "Tomorrow," he said, "we test you. Don't eat breakfast. Or do. You're shinobi now. Learn to make decisions and live with them." He vanished in a bell-like flicker that made Naruto's teeth itch. Sasuke scowled. Sakura colored. Naruto watched. The space where Kakashi had been and felt that small, mean urge to chase and prove himself. The sun hummed encouragement along his bones. He ignored it. He ate breakfast, because Kurama laughed when he said he might not. "What, You think starving makes you a warrior. The fox had rumbled from whatever dream room it lived in. Go take strength where it is and then figure out how to hold it without burning the village. You need practice. Quote, they passed the bell test, not with grace and not without bruises. Naruto learned things about Sasuke's angles and Sakura's focus that day, a clean, fierce core inside the pink. A mind like a whetstone that didn't stop just because the edge heated. Kakashi said nothing, and everything, with the little lift of his eye and the way he sat slouched but never off balance. Their first mission worth the trouble came 3 days later with no notice at all. Chizuna didn't need an escort from what the mission scroll said, but mission scrolls were stories as much as anything, and stories lied. This one turned out to be about a small caravan that wasn't a caravan at all. 2 oxen pulling a covered cart whose canvas bulged wrong over boxes whose corners were too sharp for citrus and too soft for steel. The driver had calluses in the wrong places. He made eye contact too much. Naruto didn't know he was looking at anchored sealwork. He just knew his skin prickle. As they trundled toward the narrow causeway that crossed the marsh beyond Konoha's walls. Mist lay low on the water like something thinking about rising. Kakashi had his hands in his pockets and an eye on nothing in particular. It was the kind of not looking that looked at everything. Stay loose, he said conversationally. Fog is friendly to cowards and ghosts. I'll make friends with cowards, Naruto said. Ghosts can buy their own ramen. Sasuke glanced at him without moving his head, a quick cut of respect he wasn't ready to admit. Sakura tapped her fingers against her thigh, counting something Naruto couldn't see. The mist thickened. Sun bled out of it like a wound closing. Naruto breathed in and felt less. It wasn't weakness. It was a lack of pressure, the absence of the sturdy push of light that usually met him when he reached. He didn't stumble, but his body noticed the difference and filed it under, irritable. Chains rattled just at the edge of hearing. Naruto stopped walking. Left, he said, and didn't know he'd said it until Kakashi slipped that way without a sound, the driver's head jerking a half beat too late to follow. The first chain came from the right, a black whip out of the mist. And Sakura's kunai kissed it midair, a tiny spark rattling up Naruto's teeth. Sasuke moved like a hinge, clean and sharp, turning an entire body into a line. He cut 2 links and stepped where the chain had been. Someone cursed. The curse was quiet and controlled and wrong for a bandit. Naruto edged toward the cart. The urge to rip the canvas free and show the lie was a itch under his skin. Kakashi had told him about waiting, about pressure, about letting the other side move first and be the one to reveal their shapes. Naruto pressed fingers to the wood. Felt the hum. It wasn't the low, happy buzz of worked timber in sun. This was deeper, steady, the thrumming satisfaction of ink laid in strict lines and told to behave. It felt like the way the fox sometimes pressed its back against his. Hot and thinking, he slid around the wheel. The mist was almost a wall now. Incoming, he said. 4, no, 5, 3, Sakura corrected from nowhere, her voice crisp and unruffled. 2 changed positions. It's an eel pattern. One's waiting to strike when we commit. She'd learned to think like a map lately. It was becoming a relief to rely on. A figure stepped out of the fog 10 paces from Kakashi. No sound, no swagger. A mask that was too clean for the kind of thieves who wore them for show. A red sigil lay flat against the back of the mosque's left hand, quiet and mean as a spider. Good morning, Kakashi said, because there was always room for manners in the middle of a knife. Weather's terrible for sightseeing. The masked shinobi made a lazy gesture. The red sigil pulsed once. Naruto flinched. It was like someone had plucked a string under his skin, a dissonant, thin hum that woke every little hair along his arms. He reached for the warmth that was his and found it, thinner. Not gone. Pushed down. Irritated. Like trying to pull breath through a wet cloth. The other 4 shapes stepped out together, chains whispering against their wrists, moving a pattern that would have boxed the team if the team stood still. They didn't. Kakashi didn't move a finger. Still, somehow, they were moving. Sasuke sliding narrow between 2 strikes to fold into the third. Sakura already in the exact space the chain would pass, Naruto stepping into the cart's shadow with his jaw tight. Go, Kakashi murmured without moving his mouth. But go like you're thinking. Naruto went. The cart's canvas knife cut down the side with one easy stroke. Inside, crates stacked tight, each stenciled with delicate characters that weren't merchant markings. He recognized E shapes like someone recognizes a word they can't read but have seen often on the same sign. The hum grew louder. The red sigil on the masked shinobi's hand brightened a fraction, as if pleased. Naruto swore under his breath. "Sakura," he called. "Those lines, if you were going to cut power to a..." He swallowed the next word because he didn't have the right one. "To a pattern like this, where would you cut it?" "I'd look for a grounding loop," she said, and Naruto could picture her eyes behind the mist, rapid and bright. "Something that looks redundant but isn't." The chain came for his head from the left. He didn't turn. He exhaled slow. The heat in him wanted to leave. He allowed it a thread, thinner than a hair. The air between his cheek and the chain wobbled. The link brushed his skin. And the heat licked back at it the way a tongue might test a sore tooth, gentle as touch, focused as sleep. The chain sagged for a blink as if it had lost interest. Naruto stepped past it. "Got it," he said to no one and everyone. Because the grounding loop sang when you knew how to listen. It was there at the bottom right of the crate, the ink line that should have been bored and straight instead a tiny bit smug. He flicked his knife. The hum under his palm dimmed, then steadied at a level that felt like a person's breath in sleep rather than a beast's. The masked shinobi's head turned a fraction. That was the only warning Naruto got. The red sigil flared. It wasn't much, not compared to the sun. But it didn't need to be. It was tuned, precise in a way that pissed him off, and the touch of it dug under his skin where his light lived and pressed. Naruto pressed back and felt something inside him want to flare in answer. The fox rumbled. "Not like that. You'll scorch yourself before you scorch them." "Then how?" Naruto hissed through his teeth without moving his mouth. "You've got ears. Use them." Kurama's amusement had an edge of pride this time. "You keep trying to be a hammer. Not everything is a nail. Hear the ink sing and break the song." He listened. The fight around him was a draft in a house. Sasuke's strokes were cool, clean air through a narrow gap in a door. Sakura's movements were the bracing breeze that pushes a flame the right way. Kakashi's presence was the stillness at the center. But behind it, under it, the crates hummed with the red sigil's tune like a hive, each L in shaking at a slightly different frequency to create something stronger when they came together. Naruto hunched over the edge of the crate and hummed back, softly in his throat like he was trying to remember a lullaby. He turned it into a whistle to hide it from ears that would notice and pitched it just wrong, slightly sharp, slightly off, inviting every loop of the ink to tune itself to his fake, ridiculous, sincere note. A shiver ran through the crate. The masked shinobi twitched. "Now," Naruto said, and Sasuke did something with a wrist that made two chains clang off each other and go stupid. And Sakura stepped into the triangle she'd made with her traps and clicked something that sounded like a knitting needle against a glass rim. 3 tags went off with soft pops rather than bangs. The way she liked them to when she'd set them to interrupt rather than blast. The red sigil guttered. "Cute," said a voice behind the mask. They were calm. Tired. Almost. Konoha brats with clever fingers. "You're not bandits," Sakura snapped, not wasting words. "No." Naruto watched their hands. The left, with the sigil, flexed. The right dipped lower. The posture said a second seal, something kept in reserve. Something the first gesture had been meant to distract from. He was moving before he was finished thinking it, across the last of the light because there wasn't much of it in what here was tried to friend him anyway like it always did. He didn't punch. He caught the masked shinobi by the forearm as if they were partners about to dance and squeezed just enough to make the bones talk to one another. The red sigil flared and then hiccuped. Naruto used a breath of heat. Focused, gentle, the way he'd used it on the chain, and the ink blistered around the edges as the moisture under it steamed. The sigil peeled. The masked shinobi hissed between teeth and withdrew like a tide leaving a beach emptied of surprises. Behind them, the last of the chains dropped uselessly and the cart's hum died to a low mutter. Then the mist moved. It wasn't wind. It didn't swirl. It simply parted. A slice of clear air cut through it like a path with nothing human at the end of it. Naruto felt the prickle along his skin sharpen. He knew that direction the way you can tell which way a storm sits even with your eyes closed. Whoever had set this little show wasn't with the masked shinobi. Or they were. And they were here to make sure the masked shinobi didn't tell stories later. Back, Kakashi said, quiet and absolute. They stepped. The masked shinobi didn't. They adjusted their stance instead and flicked their wrist. A small, square tag, nothing like the noisy tags Naruto was used to, went skittering across the wet stones. Lightless, the masked shinobi said, almost gently. Just to talk. The tag went off with a sound like a bubble popping. Naruto's vision dimmed, and for an instant it felt like someone had put a hand over the sun. He hated it. He didn't show it. Kakashi said, "You're root." As if he were correcting a mispronounced word. No answer. No confirmation either. The masked shinobi canted their head the tiny degree that meant respect without deference. "The cart is ours," they said. "It's returning to the village. Don't follow it. Whoever is farther down the fog will not be patient with 3 children and a jonin with a reputation for mercy." Sasuke bristled. Naruto saw it in the angle of his shoulder. Sakura's mouth tightened. Kakashi didn't move. He doesn't blink unless blinking matters, Naruto thought. He filed it away. "Return what you took," Kakashi said. The masked shinobi flexed their hand. The sigil on the back of it lay flaking, ugly. Naruto couldn't feel its push anymore. He could still feel the place where it had pressed, a phantom weight. "You will get your team home if you let the cart pass. And if we don't." A pause. The fog thinned enough to glimpse motion in it. Not a person stepping forward, not exactly. The idea of someone, the sense of edges gathering. Naruto's skin went cold. That shape hummed wrong in his bones, not like sealwork, not like sun. He couldn't name it. He didn't want to. "Then it becomes an A- rank you didn't sign for," the masked shinobi said. "And children break on A ranks." "Funny," Naruto said, because the heat and the fear together made him stupid, and he had to put something in the space fear made. "I've been told I break things." The masked shinobi's mask tilted. "Not today." It sounded less like a warning and more like advice. Kakashi breathed out. "We're changing vector," he said to his team. "Sakura, take point on our traps. No scraps left. Sasuke, if someone follows, cut the tail rather than the head." Naruto. Yeah, Naruto said, because he already knew. "Be noisy when you tell me to. Be quiet until then." The cart creaked as it rolled past them. The driver didn't look at them. The masked shinobi didn't either. The dangerous idea in the fog did not move except to rotate its attention over them like a lantern turning so its light could rake different surfaces. Naruto swallowed. The fox pushed warmth into him quiet as a hand on a back. They got out with no one dead and only a little blood. Naruto counted that as a win. On the road back, under a gray sky that made everything taste damp, Kakashi said nothing for a long time and then said, "Do not speak of the Red Seal to anyone but me or the Hokage." "Because?" Sakura asked. "Because she liked to know the shape of things, because she didn't confuse obedience with intelligence. Because some people in our house forget why the house exists," Kakashi said. "And because the thing in the fog will have friends." They met Hinata by accident on the way in, which was not an accident. She had no mission scroll visible, no team. Just a neat bag over her shoulder and a pair of mirror-bright plates wrapped in cloth that she pretended not to be carrying. She fell in to walk beside Naruto without making a ceremony of it. He pretended not to ache in 3 places just for her benefit and then felt like a liar. "You have ink on your fingers," she said at last, her voice small enough that it barely ruffled the air around them. Naruto looked down. He did. He rubbed thumb and forefinger together. The skin stung faintly. "It was in the way," he said. She nodded, eyes on the road. "There's a place on the training grounds Here the water runs very shallow over stones. It sings." Naruto blinked. "Does it?" "You can hear the different notes," she went on, as if talking about something ordinary, tea or weather. "If you step in the right place, the notes shift. I thought, if you wanted, you could practice there." His first instinct was to make a joke that would put space between them, something about singing rocks and whether they took requests. His second instinct was to say yes so fast the road would laugh at him. He tried a third option. He kept his voice light and said, "Okay." They walked in comfortable silence for 2 counts of 100. Hinata's shoulders dropped by degrees as if she'd been bracing for a different answer. When she looked sideways at him, it was only for a heartbeat. You move like wind hiding its breath, she said then. So soft he almost missed it. Naruto's mouth did something complicated. Yeah, you see things people don't. It came out clumsy. He wanted to kick a rock. He didn't kick the rock. That night, he dreamed of a lattice of light speaking in pictures, cities with angles he couldn't name, a sky that folded and unfolded like paper, a small ship cutting through a night crowded with stars. He woke with the taste of metal at the back of his throat and the knowledge that someone had watched the fight through the ink. Tsunade held court the next day with a headache and no patience for ghosts. She listened to Kakashi with her elbows on the desk and her fingers pressed hard against her temple. Root, she said, and made it an ugly word. I don't care if he's got a dozen advisories signed. He doesn't get to use the village as a lab. Tell him that, Kakashi said calmly. I have, Tsunade said. And I will again. Meanwhile, you'll stay loud when you need to be and invisible when you don't. Her gaze cut to Naruto. How are you? He hadn't expected the question to feel like that. He shrugged. I'm fine. Liar, she said, without heat, and reached for a drawer. She set a small glass disc on the desk. It caught the light and threw it around the office in neat coins. Tenten's working on mirrors, Tsunade said. Our village has a lot of shade. If you need light, sometimes you make it. Naruto picked up the disc. It was cool and heavier than it looked. Thanks, he said, and meant that, too. He found Hinata at the training ground with her sandals off. The shallow water did sing. It wasn't a sound you could catch with a hand. It came up through the bones feet first, a bright, fine vibration that made the teeth behind Naruto's smile feel honest. Here, Hinata said, and stepped into a place where the current broke around a flat stone and turned the note from high to warm. Listen. He listened. He found where the next change would be and put his foot there and felt the note inside him change. 2. Hinata's mouth did a small, surprised thing that made him look away very fast, because if he looked, he would look too long. Again, she said, sounding pleased. They turned the stream into a quiet kind of training where Naruto learned to make small shifts, small permissions, letting the light in just enough to feel it without inviting it to take over, atching his breath to the water's measure. When he overreached and the warmth rippled up hungry, Hinata's hands pressed carefully against his forearms, 2 quick taps where her clan's art taught her to press. And the heat steadied like a horse with a hand on its neck. Thank you, he said, and Hinata shook her head like he'd thanked the weather. He walked home later in a dusk that made the village smell like rain just thinking about falling, the glass disc heavy in his pocket and the river's notes in his feet. He could feel it, the thing that frightened him most about himself, less a bomb than a sunrise you couldn't put back once you let it happen. But he could also feel the lines around it now, the places where choice mattered, not just power. He could feel the line between punching and holding, between heat and warmth. It made the world seem more complicated and also more fair. Night settled. Somewhere in the dark of his mind, the fox yawned. You don't sound like a fool right now, Kurama said. Don't get used to it. Party pooper, Naruto said, and Kurama's laugh thrummed like the river's own low note. He didn't see the old man in the bandages who watched the sunset from a high window across the village. Not with eyes alone. The old man lifted the red tag they'd used on the causeway and turned it between 2 fingers, not quite touching the blistered edge as if what it had done might still burn. A careful hand placed it onto a sheet of paper marked with lines and little neat notes. The boy scatters heat like a fool, Danzo murmured. He looked pleased in a way that had nothing to do with joy. But even fools can be taught to point their light. A figure in the corner moved as if summoned by the thought rather than the sound. The tag worked, they said. The masked shinobi. Their left hand was bandaged where the ink had bit them. But not for long. No, Danzo agreed. Not long enough. We will need a better net. No matter. He thinks he has time. He studied the blistered tag like a prayer bead. Let him play. The sun always comes to the window. And then the window learns how to be a lens. Outside, the village breathed. Naruto slept as if he'd wrestled a river in a fox and a sky and had managed to be kind to all 3. Somewhere, far beyond any wall, the night listened through ink lines scratched into things that shouldn't have been able to listen and held its questions like knives. Morning would come. He would run the rooftops. The light would ask him to trust it again. He would answer carefully. He had people now to answer with. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Winds in the Arena. The stream kept its promise. It sang even under a clouded sky, notes sliding up and down Naruto's shins as he stepped from stone to stone. Hinata stood knee-deep opposite him with her sandals on the bank. Hair pinned behind one ear again, a strand escaping and tickling her cheek every time she turned. She didn't fuss with it. She watched his feet. Light in, she said. Then stop. Let the water carry the rest. Feels like cheating, Naruto said. It's just less noise. Her hands lifted, hovering a breath from his forearm. May I? He nodded. Gentle taps. Heat steadied. The spark in him didn't surge into a blaze just because a door was cracked. It breathed and waited. Naruto set his heel down softer and felt the landing spread through the water instead of his joints. That, Hinata said, satisfaction softening the word. Do that when you jump rooftops. When I, what, you've been watching. He meant it as a joke and immediately wanted to swallow it back when pink rose along her cheekbones. Only a little, she murmured, eyes dropping, and the three words landed like a pebble in a still pond, the rings of it spreading in him. On the bank, a cough announced the opposite of subtlety. Did I hear someone needs help with landings that shake the village awake? Tenten strode down the slope with a bundle under one arm and the kind of grin that meant tools and trouble. I was told there was a boy who treats rooftops like drums. Naruto wrinkled his nose. It's the rooftops' fault for being drummable. Tenten snorted. Say that again while wearing these. She unrolled the bundle. Inside lay a pair of tabi with soles thicker than normal and a grid of tiny spring plates hidden in the leather, along with leaf-thin plates of mirrored steel that folded like fans. Naruto picked one up. It caught the weak sunlight and brightened the underside of the poplar leaves, painting little coins of light on the water. Shiny. Responsive, Tenten corrected. Shock Soul Tabi. The grid disperses force out, not down. You still have to be precise, but you'll bend tiles instead of shattering them if you overcook it. And these, she fanned the mirror plates, are heliographs. You two are going to keep training in the shade and pretend sunshine isn't a resource we can move around. She clicked her tongue. Please. Hinata's smile was small and delighted. You made mirrors you can carry. I made sunlight you can aim, Tenten said, smug and generous in the same breath. Try not to set anything on fire. Or do, but aim that, too. They spent the rest of the morning laying flashes of light across puddles while Hinata adjusted Naruto's stance by degrees and Tenten called out measurements like a conductor keeping time. When Naruto overreached and the heat flickered dangerous, Hinata's tap steadied it and Tenten shifted a plate to bleed the pressure, the two of them working around him like they'd been doing this for years. It wasn't a moment anyone would put in a story. It felt like one of the good ones anyway. By afternoon, the village had changed clothes. Banners went up. Shopkeepers staked their corners with skewers and sweets and cheap charms, and genin. In every color of forehead protector drifted in flocks down alleys, laughing too loud because fear burns fast and leaves noise behind. The Chunin exams made Konoha feel like a festival that had decided to brandish knives in public. Naruto liked it, not because of the knives. Because everyone had to pretend at least a little. They queued in the academy hall behind teams from Sand and Mist and Threy. Villages nobody would name without a shrug. A proctor with a smile like a dull blade handed out papers. The room smelled like sweat and ink and anxious brain. Naruto stared at the first page until numbers swam and then set the paper down. He hadn't come to fight math. He'd come to move. You weren't supposed to, but he listened anyway. Not to whispers, to bodies. Heartbeats beat their own small songs. The confident ones beat steady unless someone looked at them, then spiked a little. Pride hates being watched. The guessing ones stumbled and recovered. The ones who already knew they'd lose thudded hard and slow. Then he heard the sweetest, cleanest measure in the room. Uruka's somewhere down the hall, steady as floorboards, and, no. Not Uruka. The sound was too light, the breaths too thin. He almost laughed. The proctors were shinobi too, and some of them loved theater as much as Kakashi. The exam was a lie you were supposed to tell in public. Naruto didn't cheat with answers. He cheated with calm. He built his from other people's breath. When the boy to his left started breathing too fast, Naruto set his foot quietly against the desk leg at the precise rhythm Hinata had taught him and tapped. The small sound just enough to give the kid something to sink to. The breath steadied, the hand stilled, the pencil started to move with purpose instead of panic. On Naruto's right, Sakura's eyes narrowed. She didn't need any tapping. She knew the game before they finished passing out papers. She wrote with her mouth tight, unamused by the stupidity of it all. In front, Sasuke wasn't even pretending to read. His eyes flicked in a pattern so small only someone else who had to hide everything would have noticed. He was mapping the room. Watchers, cheaters, catches. He looked irritated, not by the test, but by how little it asked of him. When the final question told them to decide whether they would continue in the face of disqualification, Naruto swallowed the first speech th. It came to his tongue and simply lifted his hand. "We're in," he said, as casual as he could make it. Somewhere in the front of the room a man with a grazed smile looked briefly disappointed that he wouldn't get to kick anyone out. "You hate speeches," Sakura murmured as they filed out. "I like them when I can punch them," Naruto admitted. Outside, wind rolled down the street as if someone had opened a door in the sky. Sand nin moved like shadows, being careful not to pretend they weren't dangerous. Temari came with them, fan closed and slung over her shoulder like a blade someone had disguised as a joke. She took in the new heliograph plates at Naruto's belt and the spring sole tabi and the way he planted when he stood, and she smiled as if he'd written her a letter he didn't know about. "You ride noise," she said by way of greeting. Hard to teach a shinobi to do that without breaking their ankles. Naruto held up his foot and wiggled it. "Shinobi innovation," he said. "All complaints to Tenten." Tenten saluted with the fan she'd stolen from somewhere that morning. "I take suggestions, not complaints." Temari's attention had a weight to it that wasn't unfriendly. "You move light," she said to Naruto. "But you land like a storm when you forget yourself." "Don't forget yourself." Hinata shifted, a little, just enough to put herself in Temari's peripheral vision. Temari's eyebrows flicked a hello. Two currents that might one day curl around each other and cut rocks, Naruto thought, and did his best not to think it with his whole face. The Forest of Death earned its name theatrically. It had a mouth for a gate and teeth for warning signs. It ate teams that mistook the path for a promise. Kakashi walked with them to the edge because he always knew the line where letting go taught more than holding on. "If a tree tries to eat you," he said lazily, "be polite to it the first 3 times. After that, give it a stomachache." "What do I do if a person tries to eat me?" Naruto asked. "Same rules," Kakashi said. They went in and the forest treated them like any other foolish animals. It was thick and wet and patient. Naruto breathed small and careful because sunlight stitched between leaves in stingy threads and the heat in him wanted to call that unfair. He kept to the edges of rays and let his eyes work and let his ears work the way Kurama kept telling him to. He heard snakes a long time before he saw them. He heard people at the limits of hearing. The way a breath held a fraction too long before a rope swung, the rub of fabric when someone shifted their wig. Because a foot had gone numb under a crouch. They didn't get fancy. Sakura's traps made 3 amateurs walk in circles and then lay down to whimper. Sasuke took the second scroll from a missed team with the brutality of a clean cut. Only the last motion at the end showing he'd chosen not to break anything that wasn't paper. Naruto did a stupid sprint after a squirrel because it had stolen a candy wrapper from his pocket and then shouldn't have been that fast, and wound up not catching the squirrel and accidentally scaring off a centipede the size of a baby. They made the tower on the 3rd dock. Why with clothes that didn't look like they'd been washed so much as scolded. The second phase sorted out people who understood hills from people who understood cliffs. The third phase asked them to fight in front of everyone. The arena had a sound. Stone packed with sky. People's voices made a wave and broke on the ring's edge. Naruto stretched and looked up at the stands, at the flags and fans and the sun painting a line along the top row where someone had set one of Tenten's mirrors just right. He felt that line on the back of his neck like a father's hand. He didn't look at Hinata or Tenten or Kakashi. He didn't look for Temari and found her anyway. When the prelims called his name with another's, he stepped out and thought about roofs. His opponent grinned too wide and loved genjutsu the way some boys loved showing off scars. The first illusion came like a curtain dropped across the world. Naruto's arms covered in branches, his chest suddenly heavy with water, then a whisper and a blur, the feint for the real blade. He didn't fight the pictures. He listened instead. To the foot scuff that told him the boy had to stop to pivot long enough to sell it, to the catch in the throat when he committed and thought he'd fooled someone, to the crowd's intake of breath when the genjutsu made them see blood that wasn't there. Naruto moved through the gaps the way he'd learned to move through openings in shade. He used the boy's pauses against him, counted heartbeats to know when to be somewhere else, and nowhere in the arc of it did he hit hard enough to knock the air out of a chest or slam enough to bruise a liver. He didn't need to. Control hummed through him like a second kind of pride. When it was over, the boy had a little rip at his sleeve in the shape of a hand pressed into dust on his back. And the proctor's hand cut the air between them to say enough. Temari clapped once, slow and thoughtful. Tenten cupped her hands and yelled something about shock souls that made Naruto blush. Hinata smiled like she could hear the way his breath had stayed even. Between fights, the sky went mean. Clouds stacked. Wind sharpened until even the hair on the Hokage monument looked like it would stand up. Naruto felt the heaviness slide along his shoulders and tightened the straps on the heliograph plates at his belt like he could make light out of habit. He had sometimes. He could now, a little. The warmth came easier when he asked for less. Somewhere above them, snakes had already started moving. Orochimaru didn't enter like a storm. He entered like a man deciding to walk on a path others used to run. He blinked the way snakes blink, without lids, and his smile tried on compassionate shapes the way a child tries on masks. Naruto met his eyes and felt his skin try to crawl toward a wall. Oro-chin, Kakashi said. The spaces between syllables were barbed. What an ugly day, Orochimaru said calmly. His gaze slid over Naruto and left a red itch. You've collected curiosities again, Kakashi. It's a bad habit, and yours is worse, Kakashi said. It began without anyone agreeing to begin. A hum rose in the alleys ringing the arena, then a second hum under it, gentler and more cruel. And then red sigils lit, small ones under awnings, on lampposts, at the base of statues. Naruto felt it like a hand on his shoulder trying to turn him toward the ground. He kept his chin up out of sheer spite. He looked at Tenten. She was already moving, the heliograph plates unrolling from her back like a glinting snake. Hinata vanished in a Byakugan blink. Temari strode into the path of wind that wanted to ruin everyone's afternoon and planted her fan like a border. Stay with me, Kakashi said, and then wasn't there. Jonin don't run. They reveal that they were never standing still. Civilians screamed the way people do when they don't know where the danger is yet, which is worse. Naruto stepped into that sound and let it burn away the shaking in his hands. He did not try to fly. The red in the alleys dragged at him, a tide that didn't obey the moon. He ran and jumped and did not smash the landing. The shock souls drank the energy and spread it like water over stones. Ahead, a snake bigger than most alleys decided to be part of the street for a while. Its scales were painted in sigils that pulsed like a heartbeat. Don't fry it, Tenten said over his shoulder, already throwing. I want the paint intact. Quote, your wish is mine. Naruto flipped between teeth that snapped shut on where he'd been and came down hard on the serpent's coil, continued existence. Sigils shoved. Heat bucked. He breathed. Hinata's taps lived in his forearms like memory. He used heat like a scalpel, not a fist, cutting at the edges of the red ink just enough to lift it from the scales without cooking the skin. The snake thrashed. He planted, bled his landing, moved again. Temari's wind came in a smooth corridor, a pressurized lane that flattened the air for him. He rode it without letting himself smile. He saved the smiling for later. Glass it, Sasuke shouted from a rooftop over the noise, pointing with his chin as sand erupted 2 streets away. Gaara had decided the arena Ove. RW helmed him and the village offended him. Naruto followed the point, saw children bolting under a curtain of sand, and felt something ugly rise in his chest at the thought of sand eating a child. He didn't burn the sand. He melted just the edges of it. A thin skin of glass webbed over the top of the rolling dune. It wasn't a prison. It was a lid that cracked as soon as he was past and the children were gone. The parents would yell later about the mess in their street. He'd apologize, maybe, or Tenten would. Tenten liked messes. She was weaving mirror plates up the sides of buildings now, Klimby. ing with her legs while her hands stuck light where it would matter most. Left, Hinata called, voice clean as bell metal, and Naruto stepped without looking as a tag popped where he would have been. He didn't ask how she knew. He put down his foot the way they'd practiced in the stream. Gave the ground back what he didn't need. Orochimaru slid along a rooftop like a shadow deciding to be personal. He watched Naruto work with a scientist's greed. Precision, he crooned, too far for anyone normal to hear. The village taught you manners. I wonder if it can teach you how to bleed. Joke's on you, Naruto yelled back. Because other people couldn't hear didn't mean he needed to keep quiet. I bleed like everyone else. Not for long, Orochimaru mused. Kurama moved in Naruto like a hand closing around a blade. Eyes up, brat. The fox's rumble vibrated through his teeth. You can't punch a doctrine. You can only make it run out of places to stand. The doctrine has a face, Naruto said between breath and jump. I can punch faces. Quote, try not to make it your hobby. The red sigils fought dirty. They flickered just when he wanted to lift. They clamped down when he tried to draw a deep breath at once. He learned to take light in sips. He learned to lean on Temari's corridors and Tenten's plates without feeling like it made him less. In a narrow street with paper lanterns strung from eve to eve. A cluster of civilians huddled around a fallen festival cart. The red pulsed under the cart's wheels. Naruto took one step toward it and got stuck like a fly in syrup. Here, Hinata said from somewhere he couldn't see. And then a beam of sunlight snapped into existence as the last of the clouds moved and Tenten's mirror caught it and Hinata angled a second plate under a lantern. The column looked thin. It didn't feel thin. It felt like being handed a cup when you were dying of thirst and having someone touch your shoulder at the same time. Naruto laughed without meaning to and leapt. He didn't blast the cart aside. He slid his fingers under the axle and lifted just enough to get the people out, then set it down without splintering the wheel. One of the kids gaped at him like he'd turned into a story. He winked. Because that was one of the few perks of wearing a face people recognized. You could give them something small to hold onto. Go, he told them. To the square with the fountains. Keep low. They ran. The last of them had red smeared along their sleeve. Naruto made himself not look at the way it flared when he moved. He focused instead on the next line of sigils zoomed. His feet that he could interrupt if he set his weight just there. The hum stuttered. The alley brightened by a fraction only he could feel. He found Gaara by the sound the sand made when it was ang. Rai and by the way Temari's wind tried not to blow where it would make that anger worse. The boy with eyes like the inside of a bell tower and the posture of a person hugging himself with his own body. Stood in the middle of a crater and looked at Naruto with no idea how to want anything. Shukaku laughed out of him with a voice like someone rubbing chalkboard on stone. Hi, Naruto said, because song. Times that was the only version of, I'm not going to let you hurt them, that didn't make everything worse. Gaara didn't answer in words. Sand surged. Naruto stepped into it and turned the topmost layer to thin glass again. Cutting the edge off the wave without locking it into something that would shatter into knives. Temari's breath hitched in the pause. She hadn't asked for help with her brother. She took it anyway. Leave him. A voice called from a rooftop. The masked shinobi with the ruined sigil watched with both hands free and empty. Your orders are elsewhere. Then do the orders, Naruto said, not looking up. We've got this. That got him a sound that might have been a laugh if the person in the mask had ever learned how. You are going to get eaten by a doctrine, boy, they said. Pray that it chooses you last. Get in line, Naruto said, because fear and heat did the same stupid thing to his mouth. They didn't fix everything. Streets broke. People bled. Shouts layered int. Oh, the kind of noise you take home with you and try not to dream about. But the red sigil sputtered whenever Naruto and Sakura and Sasuke stood together in the right geometry. Tenten hung sunlight over corners. Hinata's voice never shook when she called directions. Temari carved corridors that let everyone else be more than they would have been alone. Orochimaru got bored of watching and went to find newer toys in the stadium. Kakashi sent a hawk that wasn't a hawk and got an answer that made him set his jaw in a way that boded ill for snakes. Naruto trusted him to cut a head while they kept cutting tails. By late afternoon, someone had put a hole in the sky and then had the decency to stitch it again. The clouds thinned in stripes. The red sigils went out as if a single hand had pinched their candlewicks all at once. The village still stank of fear and burnt tag paper, but it had the feel of people moving because they knew where to walk instead of because they were nowhere safe to stand. Naruto climbed the last flight of stairs on a roof that looked like it had decided to pretend it was level when it absolutely wasn't, and found Hinata there with her palms pressed to the back of a mirror plate like she could keep the light in it longer if she asked nicely. She exhaled and took her hands away and the light slipped like a fish. "You aimed the sun," he said. "Kind of rude. Might make it jealous." She startled at the praise and then breathed it in. "It isn't mine," she said. "I just asked it to be helpful." "That's a lot of what I do," Naruto said, and realized it was true, and didn't know whether to laugh or sit down about it. Temari heaved herself up onto the same roof as if dragging the wind behind her with a rope. Her hair was full of grit. "Your glass trick is wasteful," she told Naruto without preamble. And then, because she was Temari and not a lecture, added, "But it was the right kind of waste." "I try to make the right mess," Naruto said. "You made less of AM's than my brother would have if you'd pushed him harder." Temari didn't sound grateful. She sounded like gratitude had to go through 20 other words before she'd let it in. That counted. Tenten popped up a second later, smudged with grease and triumph. "My plates held. We're building bigger ones. Rooftop size." "Don't get ideas like that without sleeping first," Kakashi said, stepping out thin air the way only people who'd seen too much could do without being dramatic about it. "No one's brain is useful after 3 hours of being a sieve." Sasuke arrived without a sound, scowl in place, eyes flicking to Naruto as if he were a problem Sasuke had decided reluctantly might be better as an ally. Sakura sat down hard and put her head in her hands for a moment and then looked up as if she'd swallowed the moment whole and was going to digest it later. The wind cooled. The plates on the rooftops caught the low sun and flung it across the village so even shady corners had a coin of light on their steps. "What was that humming under the red?" Naruto asked. "It felt like, not ours." Kakashi's eye thinned. "You're going to get the answer soon," he said. "And you're going to hate it. Tsunade's going to start a war with the man who made that red ink," Tenten muttered, tying her plates together so she could wear them like a ridiculous silver cape. "Or at least a very loud meeting." "Both," Kakashi said. Naruto stood with the sun warm at the back of his neck and the village's sound settling back into the ordinary rhythm of hammers and shouts and laughter that was trying not to sound like relief. He didn't feel like a hammer. He felt like a person with a hand on his back that said, "Forward, but choose it." He thought of the masked shinobi's dry advice, and of the thing in the fog that had watched. He thought of Orochimaru's greedy gaze. He thought of a doctrine with a face and a choir that might not sing in any language he wanted to hear. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," Hinata echoed, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Temari rolled her shoulders and rested her fan on her shoulder. "Tomorrow," she said, and smiled without softness. "But tonight, we fix what can be fixed. I'll borrow your tinkerer," Tenten preened. "Finally, someone who appreciates my taste in ridiculous projects." "You," Sakura said to Naruto, not bothering with gentleness because Ishii knew he responded to the straight line, "are coming with me to the clinic. You look like a statue that thinks it's not cracked." Naruto rubbed a scrape he'd mostly forgotten about. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to everyone who cares," she said, and bumped his shoulder when he tried to duck the truth. They crossed the roofline as the first lamps lit. Down in the narrow streets, kids were already sweeping up broken paper lanterns and glass as if they'd planned to do that all along and were glad to have an excuse to be useful. An old woman scolded a jonin for stepping on her doorway stones with muddy boots. 2 shopkeepers argued loudly about whose mirror had done more good. The village sounded like a place that had just decided not to break. On a balcony far above, behind 3 screens and a shadow, Danzo watched the red tag crumble between his fingers. "Interesting," he said calmly. "He chooses the scalpel when the fist is available. That can be taught out of him or sharpened into a blade I will hold." A voice in the corner said nothing. "Masks don't argue with windows." Danzo turned from the sunset the way a priest turns from an altar he's certain will still be there tomorrow. "We will need a better net," he said. As if he'd only just decided something he'd set in motion months ago. And a bigger rumor. Set the song where he can hear it from far away. In a room with no window. And a floor that had once been part of a different sky, something old cleared its throat in Naruto's dreams. Pictures nudged at the edges of sleep, angles of a ship, a bright line sharpened into a lens. A path drawn between a star and a boy. He rolled over and tucked one hand under his cheek and slept anyway. When morning came, the rooftops were warm again. He ran them. He didn't shake any tiles. Hinata was at the stream before he got there, and Tenten had 3 new sketches, and Tamari had a plan that involved wind and patience, which sounded like a contradiction until she smiled and made it obedience. Kakashi watched from a railing and pretended to be bored. "You're slower today," he observed. Naruto grinned up at him. "Learning takes time." Kakashi said, a sound that could mean yes or keep going or don't die. Good. He didn't say anything about the sky being wrong for a long time in the afternoon. He didn't say the word, eclipse. He didn't have to. Somewhere on the far side of sense, a doctrine tuned its voice and wondered how loud a village could sing before it broke itself. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Steel and Starlight. Tsunade's office looked like someone had tried to wrestle order out of it and then poured tea on the result. Mission scrolls stacked in precarious pagodas. A map of the northern borders lay unrolled across the desk, weighed down by a half-full bottle and a paperweight shaped like a boar. Behind the glass, winter was already sharpening the air, the sky the pale, polished color iron gets just before a storm. Kakashi stood out of the way in the exact spot where a person would look last. Sakura's hands were tucked in her sleeves as if she were keeping a secret warm. Sasuke had the particular stillness that, on other boys, read as sulk and, on him, read as an arrow nocked and waiting. Naruto shifted his weight and didn't dent the floor. "Falling star," Tsunade said without greeting, tapping the northern map where the land of Iron's mountains broke like teeth. 2 nights ago, our northern scouts got there first, but someone, swept the site clean, left a hum under the snow that makes my sensors want to vomit. We're not the only ones sniffing. Root has interest. So does Orochimaru, because of course he does. Land of Iron, Kakashi said. Samurai jurisdiction. They want it quiet, Tsunade said. Which is fine. I want it quiet too. She slid a thin, sealed folder toward Kakashi. You'll have escort papers. Officially, you're there to assess structural damage in case the rock punched a hole in a ridge. Unofficially, you'll do what you always do. Stop my office from burning down while I'm still in it. Flattering, Kakashi murmured. Tsunade's gaze flicked to Naruto. You hear humming better than most. If there's singing under that snow, I want you to tell it the sound of our village until it answers with our notes. Naruto lifted a shoulder. I like duets. And, Tsunade went on, not softening, we've picked up a stray who knows red ink architecture better than anyone we didn't execute or exile. Karen Uzumaki. She's running from Orochimaru. Don't make that face, Kakashi. I'm tired of useful people being loyal to the wrong gods. Kakashi didn't make a face. Naruto had known him long enough to know that even no face counted as a kind. Uzumaki, Naruto said, unable to stop the word from feeling like a thrown rope. Where is she? In the corridor, Tsunade said. She lifted her chin at the door. And before you ask, yes, she bites. Don't. And no, Naruto, you can't adopt everyone with our name. The door opened on the tail end of the sentence as if the hallway had been leaning against it. Karen stepped in with her chin high and her mouth set to, don't waste my time. Red hair in a rough ponytail, GLASSES threaded with wire at the bridge where someone had fixed them badly, sleeves rolled to her elbows as if she'd been ready to fight the air. Her chakra felt a strange thing, recognizing someone not by her face but by the way existence bent near her. It reached under Naruto's skin like a cousin's mischief, familiar and foreign all at once. Naruto, Tsunade said, and the weight in her voice was the kind she used when she was about to pit 2 stubbornnesses against each other until they learned politeness. Karen, play nicely. Karen looked Naruto up and down. You're the sunburned one. Hi, Naruto said. You're the one who bites. Only when necessary, she shot back. Which is often. She dropped her gaze to his hands, to the little burns that strengthened and healed stronger, to the callus on his index finger where his kunai grip lived. You hum, she added, surprised despite herself. You don't blaze unless you have to. Working on it, Naruto said. We share a clan. We get scolded by the same ghosts, I think. Karen huffed. If yours lecture like mine, you have my pity. Temari arrived as if the wind had carried her without asking permission. Tenten came behind her with a case that looked heavier than she was. Grinning the grin she saved for days when the village had given her an excuse to be excessive. Hinata slid in quietly and somehow made the air easier to breathe. Tsunade tapped the map again and the room held its breath. You'll meet an Iron Country liaison at the southern pass. They'll be polite out loud and suspicious underneath. Earn their suspicion. It'll keep them alive. And, she cut a glance toward the window, toward something only she could feel in the bones of the village. If you feel watched through the ink, you probably are. Don't let any of them write your story for you. Kakashi took the papers. When do we leave? Now, Tsunade said. Before Danzo realizes I didn't tell him first. The cold met them before the border did. Snow on the ROAD made a sound like paper when it breaks. Wind came in along the valley like someone pushing a door that insisted on closing. Naruto let the chill bite his cheeks and kept his hands out of his pockets. He had learned to take warmth in sips. He refused to take it from the village in handfuls when all it had to give was pale blue winter light. Temari's fan cut a neat path through the drift with a sigh. Do you leaf always goof off this close to politics? Yes, Tenten said without remorse. It confuses our enemies. Karen walked half a step behind Naruto as if she'd chosen, reluctantly, to trust the wake he broke. He treats you like a battery, she said after a while, nodding vaguely in the direction Orochimaru's name lived. He treats everyone like a battery, Naruto said. I prefer the word, person. People fascinate him only when they're broken open, she said, the bitterness so matter of fact it almost snuck by. He wants to see where your wires cross. He'll call it compassion if you let him. Hinata offered Karen a scarf out of nowhere. It's warmer if you pretend you're sharing it with someone, she said, a little breathless from hurrying to catch up after arranging the Heliograph plates into bundles easier to pull free with numb fingers. Karen blinked, throat working. She took the scarf. You sound like you knit, she said. Hinata tilted her head, considering. I don't, she said. But I'm good with threads. The Iron Country liaison found them at the pass. A samurai with a scar that looked like punctuation at the edge of his mouth and a stance that made Naruto think of Gates politely refusing storms. His name was Kato. He bowed not deeply at all. You're late, he said. We're right on time, Kakashi said kindly. Your snow is merely old-fashioned. Kato Yu moored the joke with a flick of his eyes. This way, he said, and turned without checking if they followed. He smelled like steel and oiled wood and loose ends tied down ruthlessly. The crash site was not a crater so much as a bruise sunk deep into the mountain's ribs. Snow had slumped around it strangely, the way flour piles when you drop a hot stone into it. Naruto crouched at the edge and pressed his palm to the powder. The cold stung. Underneath, the hum. He didn't reach for heat to answer it. He listened. It wasn't like Root's hum, calculating, smug. This one questioned. It asked 100 things at once and expected to be answered by angles, not words. It felt oddly patient. Here, Hinata whispered from his left shoulder. Her Byakugan saw in lines that didn't rely on sunlight at all. She touched 2 points in the snow with her bare finger and a line of clear ice formed between them. It shone. There's a pattern, not seals. Structure. Fascinating, Tenten breathed, digging gloved fingers into her case. Don't flood it. We map it. She produced a fistful of thin copper stakes and a spool of thread. We're going to play cat's cradle with a meteor. Sakura handed over pegs without missing a beat. Sasuke paced the rim, eyes on the trees, mapping how a person who didn't like them might use the branches. Temari faced into the valley wind and measured its moods. Karen stood very still, head tilted. The way shinobi stand when the world says something to their particular part of strange. Red note, she said, eyes narrowing. There, under the ridge, not recent. She turned, and Naruto felt it then. The tether she sent brushing his chakra, not a line so much as the suggestion of one, a promise of yank back if he overreached. Karen caught his flinch and gentled the pressure. "I won't pull unless you want me to," she said. "It helps. Orient people. I'm good at keeping idiots alive." "Sounds like you're my type," Tenten said cheerfully, tapping a stake into snow. "As in, the type of person who lets me be extra." It didn't look like a meteor when they revealed it. The snow came away in sheets. Underneath, a lattice-like frost that had made decisions. It rose out of dented rock in folded planes that had been made to be unfolded and then folded again. Kakashi's eye narrowed behind his forehead protector. He didn't touch it. Naruto did. Not on purpose. His hand hovered because angles invite hands. And the lattice reacted the way water does when you breathe too hard on it. Trembled, calmed, then curved toward him like a cat in that uncertain first moment of acknowledging a hand above it. "Don't," Kato said, blade half out of its sheath without a sound. Hinata exhaled just enough to measure the distance between Naruto's nerve and Kato's caution. "He can read hums," she said. "We won't wake it too loudly." "It's already awake," Karen said flatly, eyes going slightly unfocused as she listened to whatever sang to her. "But it's not hostile. It's curious." Naruto let his fingers lightly brush a plane no wider than his palm. A picture spooled behind his eyes. The impression of a small ship falling in a straight line that wasn't gravity, the memory of a sun squinting down to a dot while a child slept in a shell that loved him, cities cut to razor angles, a sky built to be navigated by rules and kindness both. He stifled the whimper that tried to climb out of his throat. The lattice felt old without feeling tired. It felt purposeful. It recognized something in him and did not care what he called himself. Kurama stirred. "HN. The fox's sound was S. Omething Naruto had learned meant, "You're not wrong," even when it wanted to say, "I told you so." Whoever made this thought in straight lines an impossible kindness. Dangerous combination. "Can you hear anything else?" Sakura asked, careful to leave room for him to ignore the question. She looked not at his face but at his hands, checking for shakes. Naruto shook his head. No words yet, and laid his palm flat. The lattice hummed back. He hummed softly in his throat to match. Karen's tether anchored him without pulling. The picture shifted again. Less a story than a geometry lesson told by a person who loved him. Like a parent explaining the kitchen table by setting a hand on it and saying, "See. This holds." "What is it?" Tamari asked. "Lens," Naruto said. He found the word not by translation but by shape. Not a weapon. Not alone. It helps light behave. And it remembers. A voice. Not a person's voice, he added when Karen flinched like she expected a ghost, a pattern. Like a lullaby with angles. "Can you make it sing for us?" Tenten's eyes gleamed. "I have mirrors. We have wind. I can build a harp in 20 minutes if." "Don't build harps in the snow," Kakashi said mildly, which was his way of saying, "Please do," when he made it to sound like, "God, must we?" Kato shifted his weight. "You will not take it," he said. "If it is not a weapon or is a weapon for someone else, it belongs to iron." "No argument," Kakashi said easily. "We're here for its neighbors." Temari's fan tilted in a way Naruto had learned meant she was about to judge the air. "Neighbors. The things that sniff when new notes drop," Tenten said, already assembling mirror plates between her knees with the greedy dexterity of a smith in love. "And the ones with red ink who smile badly. They moved the way go. OD teams do when danger stops being an if." Stakes went in. Thread stretched between them, catching snowlight and the faint, steady glow the lattice gave like moon off steel. Hinata marked lines only she could see. Karen wove 3 tethers instead of 1. 1 to Naruto, 1 to Sakura, 1 to Sasuke, so if anyone moved too far toward heat or hunger, she could make a minimum of disaster with a gentle tug. Tamari set corridors that bent wind into lanes without blizzard tantrums. Kato watched them all carefully, a hand near his hilt, like a man sharing his kitchen with too many competent strangers. They were still deciding whether to be proud of themselves when the humming changed. Naruto heard it first because he kept listening even when his hands wanted to do. The red frequency threaded in, AS. Titch through cloth he hadn't meant to invite. He looked up. A shadow fell along the ridge like someone had rolled out a carpet for bad decisions. "Down," Kakashi said, bored, and everyone obeyed because it was safer that way. The thing that pulled itself over the rim moved like a puppet with its strings too neatly tied. It was the shape of a boar if a boar had been described to someone who had never seen one and had only hands and ink to get the point across. Stamps of red sigilwork ran along its flanks in tidy rows. Its eyes were the blank open of heated glass. Beneath the ink, Naruto could see the shimmer of a summoning matrix. Old paper layered under new Orochimaru's, Karen said, disgust curling around the name like smoke. He likes his toys too clean. Kill it or cure it? Tenten asked, already unstrapping a roll of wire that had never wanted to be just wire. Cure, Naruto said, before the part of him that was tired of snakes could vote. There's a person under there. Sasuke made a faint, annoyed noise that might have been respect. Then make it quick. The boar charged. It didn't huff or bellow, just drove forward as if the red sigils had told the world to get out of its way and were offended the world hadn't immediately complied. Temari planted her fan sideways and the wind hit it like an order. The boar's steps faltered, not because of strength but because its ink had been tuned to expect certain pressures, and Temari lied to those expectations beautifully. Sakura's tags snapped to life along the snowfield in tidy arcs, their writing so clean it made Naruto want to write better. They didn't blast, they bent. The boar turned where she wanted it to without suspecting it had been compelled. Now, Kakashi said very softly, which meant forever ago and also rig. This instant and also he trusted them to be smarter than their enemies. Naruto stepped into the light they'd made between mirrors and wind. It wasn't much. Winter ate it greedily. The sky gave what it could. He took it and refused to ask for more than that. Heat collected under his skin like a quiet. He broke into a run and felt the world get simpler for a second, the straight line between where he was and where he needed to be. The sigils punished him for it. They pressed. The air thickened like honey. His feet tore little crescents out of the snow where he pushed too hard. He breathed in a the warmth tried to flare and he didn't let it. Small, Kurama murmured. Precise. You bark like a big dog, but sometimes you do better as a fox. Thought you hated foxes, Naruto muttered through his teeth. I hate everything, Kurama said comfortably, especially when it thinks it can't be gentle. Hinata's voice cut through the static, crisp as she'd promised. Left flank. There's a weak seam under the ink. 2 inches behind the shoulder. Gentle fist can crack it. Naruto didn't have gentle fist. He had hands that could pretend to be patient. He slid on the last steps rather than stomping them. Shock Soul Tabi kissing the snow instead of punishing it, and laid his palm just behind the thing's shoulder. He didn't burn. He warmed like a sun under winter curtains. The ink bubbled a little and the paper underneath lifted. The boar lurched, not from heat but from being asked to listen to a note it had never been taught. Hold, Karen said, tone flat as iron as she metered the tether so it too. Okay, not a drop more than Naruto could spend. Good, better. Sasuke ghosted across the boar's back like a problem looking for a harder version of itself. He cut 2 lines and let the third live be. Ika's Sakura had layered something clever into it. A splinter path for the summoning that wouldn't snap back on the host like a whip. Temari, Tenten called, voice bright with the relief of having a plan that lives. Give me a slipstream. 3 o'clock to 9. Temari smirked. Always wanted to fly a smith. She carved a corridor. Air steadied where it had been biting. Tenten planted 2 mirror plates at the far end. Rolled a third between them, and caught a ribbon of sunlight so thin it looked like a lie. Hand it to him, she told the sky. The ribbon flicked to Naruto's shoulder like a sash someone had thrown across him. Light running along the bones of his back. He inhaled and the warmth didn't surge. It sighed. He was very careful with that sigh. He pressed again, more precise, and felt the ink peel like skin off a grape. The boar screamed then, finally, in a voice that belonged to the person under the seals. Not a sound you put on paper. The hurt of someone who had wanted to be used by something greater than them and had not noticed the greater thing didn't care. Naruto's stomach soured. He increased the heat by a breath and cut the last ridge of script. The red sigils guttered. The boar collapsed into the shape of a man with too little winter clothing and the eyes of someone who had nodded along to all the wrong hymns because they filled the room where hunger had lived. Host is alive, Sakura called. already anchoring a warm seal to the man's sternum. Barely. I've got him. Good, Kakashi said, and it was not praise so much as permission to stop bracing. They didn't get to finish the calm properly. A ripple ran under the trees along the ridge, ink moving in the veins of bark. 3 masks stepped out. The one in the middle carried a folded strip of paper in both hands like a priest carrying a relic. Kato moved. Steel whispered and was in the air between those hands and that paper before anyone else could breathe. His blade took a corner off the paper, so clean the air didn't catch it until the corner landed on the snow and burned a small hole through to the stone. Root, Kato said conversationally. Your paperwork is not valid here. The middle mask tilted. All papers are valid where the village's interest lies. Kakashi laughed behind his mask without moving any part of his face. You should sell that line to the samurai, he said. They adore that kind of poetry. Temari's fan lifted very slightly. Tenten's hand stilled without looking still at all. Hinata's weight settled into the balls of her feet, breath matching Naruto's because they de-practiced it until both of them felt less alone. Karen's fingers twitched against air as if she were deciding whether to catch 3 heartbeats in a net and squeeze. We will take custody of the artifact, the mask said. And the host? No, Kakashi said. The mask let the no sit in the cold until it looked reasonable. This is not a request. Tsunade had told them to be loud when loud was useful and invisible when it wasn't. Naruto looked at the lattice and then at the paper and then at the hole the paper's corner had burned and decided he was very tired of men with red ink telling him what belonged to whom. You can have a conversation, he said. Or you can try to steal. We're very good at the second one too. Children, the mask said without inflection, and Naruto felt heat flash under his skin before he wrestled it down. The older he got, the more he understood that the insult mattered less than the angle from which it came. Don't, Hinata breathed, the word in his ear, not to him. Not to stop him from moving but to tie a ribbon around rage and make it slower. Karen's tether tightened a fraction. He's baiting, she said. He wants you overheated so the ink will like you less for the next 10 minutes. Naruto smiled at the mask with all his teeth. We have a first aid kit, he said. It's very good. Do you? Something in the posture of the 3, not fear. Calculation. Flicked and found a path with less unknown in it. This is not finished, the mask said, which was the same thing the fog had said at the causeway and also the kind of thing you said when you meant, I don't want to pay today. Nothing ever is, Kakashi said amiably. But you can finish leaving. They did, not through the trees but down into the snow as if the mountain had decided to swallow them. Like a polite host removing a plate from a table before anyone could say no. The hum in the lattice had changed by the time Naruto dared lay his palm back to it. It wasn't louder. It was warmer, like a stove that had been allowed to do its job in a kitchen instead of to heat a church. He risked a little hum of his own and felt the picture answer. Not a history, not a prophecy, just a set of lines. Drawn between stars that could be drawn by any child who had loved a bright thing enough to try to map it. You're not ours, Naruto told it without moving his mouth. But you're not theirs either. The lattice, being a lattice and not a throat, kept humming without conceding the point. It leaned slightly toward him, the way cats do when you finally understand where to scratch. They worked until their hands stung and then stopped. Because stopping is a skill too. Kakashi had Kato sign an official document that said, everything is fine, 3 different ways so Iron could show their elders death. Words had been put in front of danger and danger had nodded and moved on. Tenten packed plates with the efficiency of a criminal returning evidence to a shelf exactly as she'd found it. Tamari brush. Ed Snow from Gar's memory without meaning to. Hinata wrapped the rescued host in Karen's scarf after Karen shoved it at Naruto, pretending not to notice she had to sniff hard once before she let go. On the way back down the pass, the wind danced that way it does when it's wondering whether to storm or grant reprieves. Naruto's legs were heavy in a satisfying way. The heliograph plates tapped softly against his pack. Hinata's shoulder brushed his now and then, like punctuation, not like a declaration. Karen walked ahead of him and behind him and then ahead again, measuring the world for 3 TS and for the places a family might be found. They did not make it to the treeline before someone tried to steal their relief. The corridor materialized out of the snow in front of them, a narrowing of space without walls. It didn't glow. It didn't smell like ink. It felt like bad advice given by a person in a friendly voice. Naruto's skin crawled. He hadn't felt this exact thing before, but his bones recognized the cousin of it. Roots always had tried to push him directions he wouldn't have chosen. This corridor tugged softly at his heat. It was tuned to his exact frequency, and that made him angrier than the boar had. Back, Kakashi said, very calm. Naruto took one step forward instead. Naruto, Sakura warned. I know, he said. I won't give them a handhold. He put his palm up like he was telling the corridor to stop. If you want me, write me a letter. We don't do hallways without doors. The tug increased, still polite. He didn't burn it. He hummed wrong. Karen's tether snugged around his ribs like a seatbelt. Hinata put the pads of her fingers in 2 points on his forearm and he felt the light in him behave better. Temari's wind hit the space sideways, and the corridor's suggestion split like silk under a knife. The path reappeared covered in ordinary annoying snow. Thank you, Naruto said, to all of them at once. It wasn't a battle cry. It felt better. They made Konoha at dusk, which is when good villages look their bravest. Smoke rose from cook fires. The Hokage monument glowed the way stone glows when it remembers that it is older than everything else. Soon, Aide's office lights burned like someone had decided sleep was negotiable. Tsunade listened without interrupting. She took off her reading glasses at lattice, and rubbed at the bridge of her nose at root corridor. You made a choice, she said finally, to Naruto. You cut the host free instead of his head. Seemed like a person under the ink, he said. There was, Sakura said. There often is. And you found a thing that isn't a weapon until someone decides to make it one, Tsunade went on. The world is full of those. You told it a story with your hands. She looked tired around the eyes. Danzo will try to tell it a better one with paper. Naruto blew air out between his teeth. We'll write louder. Tsunade's mouth twitched. Do that, and if you see the masks again, tell them, no, on second thought. Don't tell them anything. Come tell me. I like delivering bad news to men who look in mirrors too often. Outside, the village felt warm in a way that didn't depend on the sun. Tenten peeled off toward her workshop with the hunger of a woman about to commit art. Tamari cracked her neck and announced she was going to have tea with a person who hated her and would need a friend after. Karen looked at Naruto for a long moment, then at Hinata, then at the sky. I can build tethers that don't require biting, she said abruptly. If you want. For the next time you're stupid. I think I'm going to be less stupid. Naruto said. But yes. Hinata bowed slightly. Thank you. Karen flapped a hand as if to wave away both thanks and the part of the air that had gotten complicated. I'm not your friend, she said automatically, and then, because honesty runs in their blood like gossip, added, yet. She left. Naruto watched her go until the world remembered where to put its corners. Hinata walked with him to the stream without deciding to, two people returning to the same sentence at the same time. The water sang under ice. He stood where he always stood. She stood opposite. You flew, she said quietly, as if the word were shy. A little, he said, and felt his grin tilt uneven as the memory of it got under his ribs. Felt like saying yes to a question I've been trying not to ask. You didn't burn, she said. Small pride in her voice. I had help. He looked at her. I'm learning how to ask for it. Her smile came and went. You're good at giving it. He wanted to saw. Why something clean and true that would make the air feel like the inside of a promise. The best he found was, stay. I will, she said, like a fact. Until you say go, and then I'll follow. They practiced not for long and not hard. The day had taken its tithe and he was content to pay it with an early bed and a quiet heart. He left her at the path where it tilted toward the Hyuga compound and RNED toward his apartment with his hands in his pockets and his head full of lines and lattices and notes that lived under snow. He didn't see Danzo watching a red tag crumble into powder into a metal dish. He didn't hear the old man say, he chooses not to incinerate. We'll cure him of that. He didn't hear the reply that wasn't a voice but the clink of glass on glass, new tags being set into new boxes with new, uglier notes inscribed on them. He slept. He dreamed of a kitchen table, a hand pressed flat to wood, a voice that wasn't a voice saying, "See. This holds." In a temple far to the west, under a roof cut to angles that made stars ring, a man in white traced a circle with his finger on cold stone, and the air there sang a single, pure tone. He opened his eyes. They were calm. "Sunborn," Otsutsuki Akihara said to no one. Soon, the tone ceased. The stone remembered being quiet. Morning came anyway, because that's what mornings do. Naruto woke and ran the rooftops because that's what he does. He didn't break tiles. He landed like a promise kept. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The pale choir descends. The messenger reached them at twilight, when the village roofs held the last scraps of day-like coins someone had forgotten to collect. She wore travel-dusted robes the color of wet bone and carried a staff bound with paper charms. When Naruto met her on the steps of the Hokage's tower, she looked past him as if checking the angle of the sun. "I'm Shion," she said, and the word landed like a bell tapped with two fingers. "I see, not futures. The lines that most want to happen." She focused on him finally, pupils wide with the strain of having slept on hard ground. "Your line is very loud." "Hi," Naruto said, because introductions felt better if they started simple. "We're trying to quiet it down. You'll want to wait until after this." Shion's mouth pinched. "There's a confluence in the west. It's small now. It becomes very large if ignored." Tsunade listened without sitting. Shion spread a map on the floor and weighed its corners with charms that smelled faintly of plum. She didn't point to a place so much as to a fan of possibilities that narrowed to a blade near the border between wind and river. "If the choir is going to test their hymn, they'll do it here." Shion tapped the blade's edge. "A ruin that still knows how to listen." And after. Her finger jumped, unsteady only here. As if the future resisted being touched. "After, they try the sky." "After," Tsunade echoed, tasting the word like medicine she planned to force down someone's throat. "How soon?" "Tonight," Shion said. That was enough talk. They left when the village lamps were just beginning to bloom. Tamari took point because the land they crossed had once been hers in the way sand makes itself everyone's for a little while. Then leaves without apology. Tenten wore her plaits like a cape. Karen loped along with her messy ponytail, listening to heartbeats and humming under her breath to D. Distract herself from the things the world insisted on telling her. Hinata kept pace without ever making anyone else slow down, a quiet geometry at Naruto's shoulder. Shion moved like a woman walking tea. A crowded room only she could see, stepping where nothing was and never brushing what might be. They reached the ruin near midnight. The moon had not yet fattened. It hung thin and high, a polished slice. The ruin had the bones of a temple and the stubbornness of anything that used to teach people how to behave. Columns lay like fallen trees with their fluting worn out by 100 years of wind. The only sound was the sand. Needy and patient, Shion stopped just inside the broken mouth of the place and flinched. "They're here," she said quietly. "No, they're near and choosing. And the place remembers being sung at." Tenten unpacked without being asked. She sunk stakes between stones and slung thread from fallen lintels. The heliograph plates glimmered in the dark like sleeping fish. "Moonlight is still light," she muttered, half to convince the sky, half to remind her hands why they were doing this. "We'll feed what we can." Karen touched Naruto's wrist with two fingers, barely there. He felt the tether slip into place, snug as a sash. She built two more with practiced economy, one to Sakura, one to Sasuke, and then, after a pause that looked like an argument she lost to herself, a fourth to Hinata. "If the hymn hits you, it dulls your wanting," she said in a low voice. "You'll forget the first 5 reasons you have for being alive. I'll remind you." "That's the darkest pep talk I've heard," Tenten said, sucking a pin between her teeth. "I'm weirdly comforted." Tamari stood in the doorway with her fan half open, reading the wind like a rude letter. "They like empty places. They don't like surprises." She smirked. "Let's be very surprising." The first voice came as a chord, not a shout, the shape of someone playing 3 clean notes on nothing. The air cooled. Fires. Further along the ruin guttered and went blue, which should not happen and did anyway. Naruto's skin prickled in a way that had nothing to do with red ink. This was a hunger that took light by forgetting it, not by biting it. The acolyte stepped out from behind a broken column. He wore white that wasn't cloth so much as lacquer you could bend. His skin had the faint cracking pattern of pottery that had once been fired too hot. When he breathed, the color of the night seemed to pull toward his ribs and then return reluctantly to the world. Sunborn, he said without contempt or delight. His voice was 3 notes again. One too pure for a throat to produce. A village taught you to be polite to your heat. Villages are good at that, Naruto said. Politeness. Heat. The acolyte ignored the joke. Your star gives more than it should, he went on, like a priest reciting from a book he didn't entirely believe. We harvest only what will be wasted. Temari's fan didn't move. Sand says thieves always call themselves farmers. The acolyte's eyes slid to her and slid on. Wind daughter, he said, recognizing the knife by its balance. Step aside. This is about suns. It's about people under them, Naruto said. Softer than he'd intended. We're full of those. The acolyte tipped his head a fraction. The doctrine does not account for argument, he said. Only for loss. He lifted and sang a note that wasn't loud and hurt anyway. Color thinned. Shadow went colorless, then bright, then nothing at the edges. Naruto exhaled and felt the warmth in him want to answer the wrong song. He didn't let it small, he reminded himself. He let the heat gather like breath in fog. Hinata's taps came. 2 precise touches at the muscle where his forearm met his wrist, reminding his chakra. A coil's how to behave like coils and not like rivers in flood. Karen's tether hummed. Stay with us, she said, voice iron. If you wander, I yank. Tenten called, corridor, and Temari obliged, pin. Ing wind into a lane the thickness of a small street. Tenten skated a plate down it with a flick. It caught moonlight like a trickle into a cup and poured it along its shining spine. She angled it faw's. Tea and the ribbon struck the acolyte not like a beam, not enough to spark, but like a finger to the sternum. The hymn faltered on a beat. The doctrine didn't account for mirrors either, Tenten said sweetly. The acolyte replied by unmaking 3 lantern flames with a flick, each blink like a swallowed breath. Naruto didn't look at the dark. He kept his eyes on the acolyte's hands and throat. The ong came from the hollow behind the sternum, he realized, the place a shout uses, but precise, as if tuned with a knife. He'd have to shift it, not break it. Breaking would feed it, shifting might make it trip. Angles, he muttered, and Karetsu's memory of a kitchen table touched the back of his thoughts. See. This holds. He moved. The hymn pushed. He let it slide past and stepped into the place W. Here it was weakest. A tiny delay at the end of the 3rd note, the human flaw of someone who had been taught to be perfect and still had ribs. He pressed heat there, not to burn, but to change the time between notes. It was the combat version of tapping a pencil on a desk to get someone to breathe with you. The acolyte's eyes widened a fraction. He adjusted. The hymn grew more precise. Cute, Naruto said between his teeth. You listen. Listening is how you harvest cleanly, the acolyte said, and flicked a hand. Shadows stepped out of shadows. Not people. People-shaped. 5 villagers, faces. Slack with that particular kindness the enthralled keep, moved into the ruin and stood between Naruto's team and the acolyte. Their eyes were full of the kind of light no one wants to see in a person. Don't, Hinata said quietly. Like throwing a rope. I won't, Naruto said back, like catching it. The acolyte's mouth moved for the first time in something like emotion. We need hosts to tune hymns, he said. We return them when we are done. No, Sakura said flatly. You return them wrong. The fight became a puzzle with hands and heartbeats. Temari used wind only at knee height so it wouldn't smash ribs. Sakura's tags went under sandals and adjusted weight so an enthralled foot would slip at the right moment instead of breaking a leg. Sasuke mapped the shortest paths between wrists and pressure points and struck with an economy that looked cruel until you noticed how little he actually took. Tenten caught moonlight like thread and stitched a moving screen between the acolyte and the hostages. Angles shifting every breath so the hymn had to travel through too many corners to keep its purity. Naruto put his palm to the hymn again, found that stupid tiny delay, and pushed his heat not into the sound, but into the space it left. Like chalking a door with a wedge, but the door was a cord. The hymn faltered. The enthralled blinked once. Karen's tether tightened. Now, she snapped, and Hinata was there. tapping 3 places on a forearm with the gentleness of a locksmith who loved the door she opened, and the woman gasped and crumpled, free enough to cry. 4 left. The acolyte didn't panic. He tuned sharper. The air got thinner around the edges of Tenten's plates. Color leached again. The stones under Naruto's feet felt less like stones and more like ideas of stones someone had written on paper. "You can't keep that up," he said, partly to keep his mouth moving and partly because it was true. "The world likes being colored in. The world likes balance," the acolyte said mildly. "You are a problem of excess. Join the club," Tamari muttered, then louder, "Wind corridor up, 5 degrees. Give me a pocket." Naruto felt it open. A small, steady pressure above his shoulder. He pushed off, but not to fly. He rode that pocket just long enough to put him above the hymn's throat and then dropped gently instead of smashing. He didn't aim for the acolyte's chest. He aimed for the ground in front of him and warmed the stone until a thin veil of air lifted. The next note hit the veil and lost its edge. The second enthralled man blinked fast, like someone waking into bright morning. 2 more. They took longer. The acolyte adapted, the notes becoming less like a song and more like a tool. Naruto felt the hunger in it clearly now, no malice, which somehow made it worse. The doctrine had scraped out the parts of wanting that look like faces and left only the part that takes. Kurama moved like a tide inside him, the warmth a steady weight at his spine. If you burn, you give him food. If you starve, you give him victory. Third way, Naruto said. I hear you. He did something that felt like a lie and a prayer both. He matched the hymn for 3 notes, exact, gave it what it wanted and more. Gave it brightness and breath, and then on the 4th, shifted 1 hair off and fed that offness into the plates Tenten held ready. The reflected hymn came back at an angle and met its own throat and shivered. The third enthralled fell to his knees, sobbing like a man who'd been underwater too long. The 4th stood at the acolyte's shoulder with a knife he didn't remember picking up. Don't, Naruto said, though he knew the man wasn't hearing him and he didn't even know who he was talking to, the hand or the doctrine or himself. Sasuke did it. Then, the thing onl. Why he could make so clean it didn't break the heart. A flick of wrist, a slide of foot, a steel whisper, and the knife wasn't in a hand anymore. It lay 2 tiles away with the indifferent little clink of a coin. The man blinked and stared at his palm as if it had betrayed him. Sakura was already there, seal warmth blooming against his chest. Hinata touched the 3rd point and the 4th hostage sobbed with his whole body. Which was better than the soundlessness that had lived there a moment ago. The acolyte watched them save people and didn't look angry. He looked puzzled, the way a monk looks at a chipped bowl and tries to understand if the chip is a flaw or a history that makes the tea taste better. You choose work over purification, he said. Work is how we stay, Naruto said. Purification is how you make nothing precious. Quote, the acolyte lifted his chin. You talk like an elder and move like a child. I don't know which to kill first. Neither, Tamari said. You're leaving. Am I? The acolyte said, and sang again. The plates bloomed light. It wasn't enough. The ruin itself disagreed. The hymn crawled up its stones like ivy and drank where Tenten's mirrors couldn't feed. The color of Hinata's jacket paled. The air near Karen's hand looked thinner than it had any right to. Naruto's teeth hurt as if the world had started to sing a note below hearing and his bones had decided to help. He could have pushed then. He could feel the heat in him like a reservoir he hid from himself because he'd learned to be careful. The acolyte's hymn called to it as a well calls to a thirsty mouth. For a second his breath went long and his hands remembered a version of him that didn't know villages, only sky. Hinata's fingers pressed his wrist. 2 taps. A 3rd. His breath came back like a friend. He looked at her quickly. Saw the fear she was too practical to use and the steadiness she chose instead, and he decided again. Don't copy him, he told himself. Make him copy you, he sang. It was stupid. He didn't have a doctrine. He had a kitchen table and a river and 3 taps on his arm and a village that had held him up when he was tired. He had Kurama's disapproving rumble that sometimes tasted like affection. He had wind corridors and mirrors and the kind of strength that knows how to be patient because it has to live with itself tomorrow. He sang all of that, not with His throat as much as with where he put his feet and how he warmed the stone and how he raised his hand when he asked Tenten for light without asking for all of it. His voice shook once. He let it. The acolyte blinked like a man staring into a house he'd been sent to rob and finding a family eating. Impossible, the acolyte murmured, and the word didn't come in 3 notes. It came in 1, unprepared. Boring is impossible, Naruto said. People are just work. The hymn met itself again in Tenten's angles and came undone. Not snapped, not shattered, undone like cloth when you find the end of a thread and pull. It fell into the ruin harmlessly and the ruin didn't drink it. The ruin held. The acolyte lowered his hand. He looked around as if he had arrived in a place he hadn't expected. For a breath, Naruto hoped. Then the acolyte's eyes cooled. Doctrine holds, he said. We return. He turned and walked into the colorless air and it took him. The ruin exhaled. Heat came back in a rush. The moon remembered how to be a coin. Sakura knelt beside the hostages. One breathed. Another breathed badly. A third breathed like a man who had once thought he would die old and had learned he wouldn't. The fourth did not move. Sakura tried anyway. She always did. Her chakra fit into the shape of people's hurt like a careful hand. This time it met a room no one lived in anymore. She lowered her hands. No drama. No screams. She just sat back on her heels and breathed out through her nose and the sound ended on a soft, furious growl. Naruto put his palm flat on the stone. It wasn't a prayer. It was the closest he had to a place to put his hands when he couldn't punch the air. Hinata didn't say, "I'm sorry." She didn't say anything. She stood beside him, shoulder touching, and the touch was a place to put something too heavy to carry. Tamari looked at the moon, eyes narrow, jaw set. Tenten's plates hung limp in her hands. She wiped one with the heel of her palm like she could polish the moment into something useful. Karen sat down hard and didn't pretend she cared about keeping her clothes clean. Kakashi stood still and let them take the time it took. In the end, he was the one who closed the man's eyes with 2 fingers and looked older for it. We send them home, he said. They did. They wrapped the man in a cloak he'd lent himself for a festival day and carried him carefully, no because he could feel it but because they could. The other 3 they walked between them, keeping their steps short and the world small. Shion walked a little apart, watching lines shift, her mouth tight. At the edge of the ruin, the sky spoke. It wasn't sound. It was pressure. It made the hair on their arms rise and the little muscles by the ear twitch like someone was saying their names from 3 rooms away. Sunborn. The word arrived without moving air. It fit behind Naruto's eyes like a script that expected to be obeyed. Naruto swallowed. Yes. His voice sounded thin. He didn't fix it. You refuse efficiency. The voice did not disdain. It did not admire. You make choices too small for doctrine. Doctrine forgets kitchens, Naruto said, surprising himself. And people keep their hearts there. Silence. Then, kneel when the sky darkens, and I will let your village keep its lamps. Temari's face went sideways in a smile without humor. Ah, she said under her breath. There's the god. Naruto lifted his chin very slightly, because he had learned not to bare his throat if nobody had earned it. We don't kneel, he said. We build chairs. Then I will break the legs. Calm. Absolute. Prepare your mirrors, child. The shadow I bring will find them lacking. The pressure eased, and for a second the ruin felt stupidly normal. Just stones, just wind. Shion exhaled like someone coming up from under heavy water. That was him, she said, not asking. The doctrine with hands. Akihara. Kakashi tilted his head back as if to see a face 2 worlds up. He timed the speak to catch our worst breath, he said. He's good at his job. So are we, Tenten snapped, wiping her eyes without embarrassment. We bring more plates. Bigger. Smarter. I want half the rooftops in Konoha on a sunshine web before the week is out. You'll get them, Naruto said, vividly grateful to have a promise to carry. Tamari, can you build wind corridors that hold for longer without wanting constant supervision? Temari's eyebrows went up. You want highways. I want rails in the sky, Naruto said. So if the hymn eats color, I still have a path. Tamari considered, then grinned like someone picking a fight with a storm and betting on herself. We can make them. Karen. Naruto said. Those tethers. You pulled me back without breaking what I needed. Can you scale it? Tie a net under the whole team. Not alone, Karen said. Blunt and unashamed. But if you give me 3 medics with hands and half a day with your chakra signature, yes. It will make you feel like you're wrapped in silk. You'll hate it. You'll thank me. Hinata. Naruto said, voice softening without his permission. Can we fit those taps into a harness? Something I can carry when you're 3 roofs away. Hinata's smile was small and fierce. We've been mapping your coil rhythm for weeks, she said. We can make a metronome you can wear. Shion stared at the moon like a woman reading a ledger that wasn't finished. The eclipse is in 3 days, she said. Dawn sighed. He's not coming for you alone. He's coming for the idea of you. Villages that teach people not to waste their suns. Naruto breathed once, tasted fear and decided not to spit it out. Then we teach louder. They moved like a city under orders, which is to say they moved like a family under pressure. Imperfect, fast, opinionated, generous. Tenten took over the armory and turned it into a mirror factory. 10 genin who thought they'd signed up to carry water found themselves filing plate edges until their hands cramped and then laughed when 10 told them they were artisans now and had to complain properly. Tamari ascended the wind towers with 2 sand specialists she'd bribed with the promise of making Konoha them, and they wrote corridors into air that held like beams. Karen took over a clinic and then 3, sketching tethers with her fingers and training medics to feel the difference between pulling someone back from a cliff and yanking someone into a wall. Hinata and a small team of Hyuga sewed chakra metronome harnesses with tiny plates hidden under banding, their needles quick and sure, their faces a line of quiet resolve. Sakura made charms that would stay warm under clothes when panic wanted to make hands cold, then snuck them into pockets with the smugness of a thief. Sasuke walked the rooftops at night and memorized the angles between plates, stamping them into his body so that when he moved, he wasn't guessing. Naruto didn't stand still. He ran roofs. He lifted beams. He carried plates up ladders because he was strong and because it mattered that he set his shoulder under the same loads everyone else did. When people called his name, he didn't do the hero thing and make a speech. He took what they handed him and handed back what they needed and let the village see him work. That was a kind of power doctrine didn't understand. He slept in the cracks. Kurama grumbled in a way that admitted worry and refused to call it that. You will be weak at dawn, the fox said, when he slipped between one rooftop and the next. Your little plates and your favorite wind can't put a sun back in the sky. I don't need a sky. Naruto whispered into the cold, and surprised himself with how much he believed it. I need a village that remembers how to hold each other's elbows. You're unbearable when you're sentimental, Kurama said. Then, grudging. Try not to die. I have a reputation. On the second night, Naruto climbed the old bell tower and found Hinata there with her harness laid out on her lap. She patted the space beside her without ceremony. He sat. The village breathed below like a living thing. You could feel the way each lamp talked to the next. She fitted the harness to him without touching more than she had to. Which meant she touched him a lot and every contact was careful. The plates lay along his ribs and spine in a pattern that made sense to his body. When she tapped one with her finger, a soft rhythm pulsed under the bone. He closed his eyes, listened, and felt his breath align like water settling in a bowl. When the hymn catches you, she said, voice steady, press here. She tapped his side, once, then again. It will remind your coils which way to spin. He nodded. If the metronome gets pulled. It won't. Her mouth tilted. But if it does, I'll be there. Tethers help. He looked at her, really looked. The way you look at someone you've been seeing every day and realize you've been saving the seeing for later. He wanted to say 100 things. He said one. Stay with me. I plan to, she said, very simply. The third dawn arrived with a sky the color of unpolished steel. The village bristled with bright at every angle, plates glinting on rooftops, small mirrors in alley mouths. Hand-sized tokens on windowsills that children had sworn to turn just so when the light got mean. The wind corridors shivered into being, invisible until you stepped into one and felt your weight get redistributed like the world had decided to help you for once. They were ready, which didn't matter to the eclipse. It came like a hand over a candle. Light thinned. The village murmured. People who had been prepared anyway leaned into each other. Naruto stood on the Hokage monument's brow and felt his heat drop the way a bird feels a draft die. Across the sky, a thin white line drew itself slow and then stopped. It was not a blade. Blades admit they cut. This line simply made a decision about brightness and held it to account. Beneath it, 3 smaller lines unspooled. A shape made itself out of absence. Akihara stepped onto air like air was happy for the company. He wore white that was not cloth. His hair was tied simply, like a monk who had long ago stopped treating his body like a person. His eyes were calm, and that was worse than hunger. Sunborn, the Not voice said. Kneel. Naruto's knees worked. He didn't. He breathed the harness's beat. He let Karen's net snug around his ribs. He felt Temari's corridor push against his calves like a slope you wanted to run. He heard Tenten smack a plate into place 2 roofs over and swear at it lovingly. He listened for Hinata's steps and found them because they matched his breath. He thought of the man in the ruin who hadn't woken and let the grief sit beside him instead of inside him. No, he said, we stand. We keep standing. If you break us, we stand crooked. Akihara's mouth did something that might have been disappointment if he'd still used that language. Then we begin, he said, and the hymn that wasn't a sound, exactly, began to eat the color of the world. Naruto took 1 step forward because forward was a decision. The harness tapped. The tethers held. The mirrors caught what light there was and handed it along 100 small hands. He didn't fly. He moved across rails in the air someone he loved had ridden for him, and for a breath, even under a cheated sky, Konoha shone. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Daybreak Sovereign. The eclipse made a sound like a crowd holding its breath. Light thinned from gold to pewter to something that wasn't a color so much as the memory of one. Shadows lost their edges. The plates Tenten had strung across Konoha's rooftops caught what the sky grudged and passed it along in bright, stubborn coins. Wind corridors Temari had carved into the air pressed against Naruto's calves and shoulders, telling him where to put his weight if he wanted to move like a person who had rails under him when the road got mean. Akihara stood on nothing the way a man stands on a floor. He built himself and expected you to admire. The white of his robes wasn't cloth but something like lacquer, bent to obedience. The hymn he breathed wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Color left the world where it touched. The warmth in Naruto's chest wavered and then steadied against the soft, regular taps hidden under his ribs, Hinata's metronome telling his coils which way to spin when the sky forgot. Kneel, Akihara said, and the not sound of it tried to decide where Naruto's knees lived. Naruto didn't test them. He took a step forward instead because forward was a decision he could live with. The harness tapped. Karen's tethers snugged. Tenten's plates flashed. Temari's wind leaned like a hand under his heel. Hinata's voice braided into his breath. 2 degrees right. Land softer. Let's get rude, Naruto muttered. And the fox's low laugh rolled through him like the friendly side of a storm. He didn't fly. He moved across air like a craftsman walking joists. Step, step, plant, riding the push Temari had set into place. The hymn ate at his edges. He kept those edges small. Tenten yelled from a rooftop, wind whipping her hair under a strap of steel, line coming left. A ribbon of light sprang to life along his shoulder as she bounced a plate off 2 others and made a narrow, honest corridor out of spite. Sasuke's voice cut across the rooftops, dry as a knife. Don't chase. Make him commit. Akihara didn't chase. He adjusted. The hymn tightened. The plates dimmed by a fraction. Children on balconies everywhere gripped their coin mirrors in small hands and turned them the way Tenten had taught them. Mouths small with concentration. Adults didn't shout. People who shout at eclipses lose their voices for the wrong reasons. Instead, a woman on a ladder lifted a plate and aimed it along a gutter to a boy with bandages on his forehead who aimed it to an alley where Sakura was binding someone's arm. The village took light and handed it on. Now, Kakashi said, not loud. And Naruto moved because that was how Kakashi's, now, worked. It arrived in your bones a breath before your ears. He went close because the sky was against him and close is where bodies forget doctrine. He slid under the first wave of thinness and felt his hair lift as the white edge gnawed at the air. He put his forearm into Akihara's ribs. He could have broken them. He didn't. He used the touch to feel the him in the body. Not the sky. The beat lived behind the sternum, pure as an instrument, dead as a rule. He filed that away like a thief measuring a door. Akihara's hand moved with efficient contempt. White bloomed point blank. Naruto's harness tapped. 1, 2, Hinata's rhythm reminding him he had a body in there somewhere. Karen's voice came in steady and too calm. She had a medical tone for disasters. Breath. I have you. He took the hit on the side, not the core. It ate the color out of his jacket. It didn't eat his choice. Sakura's tag snapped against Akihara's ankle and didn't explode so much as insist. White slid sideways for a blink. Sasuke arrived in that blink the way precision does, young and unpleasantly accurate. His strike wasn't to the head or throat, it was to AT. Any white seam printed in Akihara's skin where a line of song ended and another began. The contact didn't break anything. It made a skip in the hymn, the way a record pops when a speck of dust is in the groove. And that skip gave Naruto space. He took it. He didn't pour heat. He placed it, the way Hinata had taught him on the river. He pressed the warmth into that smallest pause. White leapt to correct and, in correcting, revealed itself. Akihara retreated 3 inches in the air. Surprise flickered and left behind a calm that tasted like absence. Child, he said, and it was almost gentle. I tuned this doctrine for centuries. That's a long time to be wrong, Naruto said, and when his mouth tried to get him in trouble, he heard Hinata's small exhale, warning without scold, and shut it. Ot picked that moment to turn the village into a testbed. The net rose out of alley mouths and between chimney lines, red ink woven into a web as delicate as lace and hungry as a trap. It glinted around Naruto's legs and tried to complement his heat into staying put. The first line went around his knee with the precision of a lover who wanted to be a jailer. He felt the old prickle, causeway fog, alley sigils, and anger surged hot. Don't, Karen snapped in his ear. If you boil it, it binds. Breathe, he breathed. Sasuke swore somewhere extremely proximal and shaped a kunai through 3 fibers with surgical impatience. Tenten pivoted on a roof ridge, flung a plate, and glassed a section of net just enough to make it brittle without mixing red and white into a color no one wanted to see. Then Kakashi landed on a lamppost and said, as if inviting a friend to coffee, Danzo. The old man's voice came from the shadow of a window as if it was the window speaking. Konoha will not kneel to a doctrine it cannot claim. He said pleasantly. We will claim the boy. He is ours. No, Tsunade said, and the word got in everywhere. She didn't shout either. She stood on the Hokage tower, arms loose at her sides. And 100 paperweights on her desk rattled because she had decided to be a problem. He is his, and he is mine when I say so. Not yours. Drop the net. A mask moved in the net, Root's polite shape of a person. We have a. Drop it, Tsunade repeated, walking forward. The lamplight didn't like to move out of her way, it did anyway. Or I'll pull it down with your budget and the floor under your chair. The net sagged. Temari's wind hooked into that slack and turned it, just a little, so it folded instead of tightening. Tenten caught a corner with 2 fingers and rolled it like she was folding bedding. Naruto stepped free. Akihara watched all of this the way a man watches ants debate the layout of a leaf. Your house quarrels while the eclipse stands, he observed without mockery. Kneel now. Save yourself the consequences of your pride. Funny, Naruto said, as breath came back where it belonged. I was about to say that to you. Big talk when your star blinks, the not voice answered. Stars aren't gods, Naruto said. They're kitchens for villages. That got him nothing. No anger, no interest, just a small adjustment in Akihara's feet as he set them for the business of erasure. The hymn widened, color thinned further. The plates went dark enough to make Tenten snarl under her breath and slap one with the heel of her hand like it owed her rent. Keep feeding, she told the village. Point by point, little hands. Good, good, I see you. Turn. Now. Mirrors flashed in alleys and on towers and in the palms of children standing on their parents' shoes. The net of light held ragged but held. Hinata's hand on Naruto's forearm tapped, quiet, insistence. He could have burned then, showed the sky the clean explosive answer his bones wanted to give, and he knew exactly how good it would feel for the 8 seconds before it burned a hole in everything he loved. Not like that, Kurama said, with an edge in the rumble that Naruto had come to recognize as respect braided into dread. The song eats bursts. Thread your aura through it. Warm core only. No blaze. Can you be small? Naruto didn't answer the fox with words. He closed his eyes once, tapped the plate under his ribs, and asked, "No." Aloud, the heat to run through him like a thin river instead of a flood. It lined up to Hinata's metronome. It braided around Kurama's chakra where it offered itself without eating him. The two energies agreeing on a shape that wasn't cloak or cloaklessness, something tighter, closer, like a sheen of summer on skin. He opened his eyes. The air around him fuzzed with a trembling heat mirage you'd miss if you didn't want to believe. The sky tried to bite. It got nowhere it could keep. Akihara's head moved a fraction. "Curious," he said. "A child who learns to walk at the edge of a cliff and does not fall." Quote, "Rude to call Konoha a cliff," Naruto said. "I meant you," Akihara said, and then he did something with the him that had no equivalent in throat or lung. The colorlessness torqued and shoved. Naruto's jaw clenched. It wasn't pain so much as a push that wanted to make decisions for him. "Vector 10, Hinata said, voice lined with steel. Half step left, elbow up, breathe. He did it and the world made a small amount of sense again. Sakura's seal work flared in the corners of his vision, keeping people alive where the him tried to make them ornamental. Sasuke played interception against Root with all the joy of someone twisting a knife in a bureaucracy, cutting their little incursions off at the ankle and returning what he took without leaving fingerprints. Tenten's voice went hoarse and then stayed hoarse. Turn, there, that's it, good, keep it moving. Temari's fan lived at angles only wind understood. Karen's tether felt like a sash that didn't care if he hated it. It would bruise him before it let him forget where his body ended. Talk to me, Kakashi called cheerfully into the churning above the tower. What's he got? Doctrine, Naruto said. The word tasted like old paper. And someone carved vows into his breath. Ah, Kakashi said. Religion. Cult, Tenten yelled, because it mattered. The kitchen table memory from the TTICE slid across Naruto's mind like a hand. See, this holds. He looked at Akihara, at the white lines where the him met skin, and saw the script there not as decoration but as oath. Lines printed into a person until vows replaced names. I can't break that, he said under the noise. Breaking feeds it. You can score the vow, Hinata said softly, like two people planning to move a sleeping person without waking them. Show him the door. Karen's tether tugged once. Precision only. I'll scream if you overdraw. I like you better when you're rude, Naruto muttered, and felt her ridiculous, fond snort against his ear. Temari. Tenten hollered. I need a stillness. 2 seconds, 10/3. Take it, Temari said, and wind bent with such sudden obedience the plates hardly chimed. Tenten's plates became a lens, not bright, not brave, exact. She held the focus steady with both hands and one foot against a chimney. Rail's yours, she grated. Ride. Naruto rode, not up, along. He slid. Through the narrow corridor of stillness Temari gave him into the slice of light Tenten held like a blade. He didn't aim for Akihara's heart. He aimed for the first vow line printed under the hollow of the throat. The one that made room for every other. Now, Hinata said, and tapped the plate on his ribs. Heat ran down his arm in a line he could accuse of being elegant if he ever wrote poetry. He put his palm near the script. Not on it, near. Warmth like breath before a kiss, the kind you do not steal. The ink didn't bubble, it softened. Akihara's eyes widened a fraction. He sang to push Naruto back into a range that would allow burning or starving. Naruto didn't give him either. He trimmed the heat narrower, narrowed again, until it was as thin as the ribbon Tenten gave him, and used T to score the vow line so shallowly a child's finger might not feel it. White flared. The doctrine tried to reassert. Karen yanked him by the tether so hard he almost swore. Small, she snapped. Stay small. He stayed. Second line, Hinata whispered. Left clavicle, ½ inch. He scored that one too. Temari's stillness shivered. Tenten's muscles trembled in his periphery. He felt her arms go. Ropey with strain and wanted to hold the mirror for her. Sasuke knocked a root knife into a wall and did a pivot that admitted the other person had been good and had lost anyway. Sakura's seals caught a falling man like a hand under a chin. Third, Hinata breathed. Naruto left a hairline scorch. Fourth, another. Fifth, the him tried to throw his breath off. The harness knocked his ribs like a friend. Sixth, Hinata said, voice raw now from using it like a blade. Akihara's calm unraveled not into panic but into attention. His gaze sharpened to the point where it might cut. What are you doing? He asked. And for the first time there was a human cadence under the doctrine, curiosity with teeth. Returning something that was stolen, Naruto said, and he meant it, and he thought of Ama. En in a ruin who had not woken, and he kept his hand steady anyway. The seventh line resisted. He eased. He tapped his own ribs because the harness couldn't preach without help forever. He'd fought him. He made it an argument, not a war. The line scored. The hymn wobbled and found its feet and wobbled again, like a zealot trying to finish a prayer with a broken tooth. Eighth, Hinata whispered, voice very small. You can stop. 8 is enough. He didn't. He did the ninth because mercy is sometimes finishing what you promised yourself, and then he stepped back because stepping back is sometimes the only skill that matters. Akihara did not fall. It would have felt like victory, but it also would have been a lie. He floated where he had floated. The white at the edges of the world thinned as the hymn tried and failed to find the exact lines it had owned a breath ago. He lifted a hand very slowly and touched his throat, not for pain but for attendance. Recognition. When he spoke, the word came in one note, unadorned. Enough. Naruto didn't answer. The village did, with the sound of someone dropping a pot in a kitchen and laughing because it hadn't broken. The plates didn't flare back to life, the eclipse still blotting, but they steadied. The wind corridors hummed like rails flexing in heat. Children holding mirrors grinned without knowing why. Akihara looked out over Konoha, at roofs cut with light by stubborn hands, at a Hokage who hadn't moved, at a Jonin pretending to slouch on a lamppost, at a weaponsmith swearing at a plate she loved, at a wind user who smiled like storms owed her favors. At a medic forcing pulse back into a tired body, at a boy with a harness under his jacket who chose his war to be small and local and true. This doctrine is unmade, he said, not bitter. Stating, he breathed like a man trying to inhale a room that had scented itself in spices he hadn't asked for. We will convene. You should convene far away, Tamari suggested. Where my patients can't find you. He did not look at her. He looked at Naruto a long time the way a man looks at a closed door when he's forgotten the room behind it and is not sure he wants to remember. Kneeling is fast, he said quietly. Chairs take time. People are worth time, Naruto said. A pause that did not seek approval. Then Akihara stepped back into the line he had drawn across the sky and the line folded into itself and was gone. The eclipse hung one more minute like someone thinking about a mistake and then chose the more difficult thing. It moved. Light came back uneven at first, the way hope does, and then all at once. Rude and generous. The plates lit like leaves. The village cheered once, then twice, then realized cheering wasn't a thing they needed to do for the sky and turned to each other instead. You okay? I have water. You dropped this. Your mirror angle was perfect. Teach me, is that your blood or mine? Both. Fine. Tenten sat down hard on a roof ridge and hugged a plate like a dog. Next time, she panted at no one in particular, we do bigger. Tamari flopped beside her with her fan across her knees. Next time, she said, we get paid first. Sasuke looked at Naruto, and nodded once, an admission just this side of a compliment. Sakura leaned her head against a wall for 3 seconds and then went on mending people. Karen released the tethers and rubbed her hands, like she'd been holding someone over a cliff with the tips of her fingers. You owe me sake, she told Naruto. The good kind. He laughed, breathless but honest. We'll rob Kakashi. Kakashi didn't object. He had vanished to fetch something like a hawk and came back with a cuff around Danzo's ambition instead. Root masks politely knocked into custody by the Anbu who answered to the Hokage, not anyone else. Tsunade descended the tower steps with her hands in her coat pockets and a smile like a woman about to redraft a law with a hammer. Danzo, she said when they brought him up, voice velvet wrapped iron. You don't get to light a fire under my house and then claim you were trying to keep us warm. It was my duty to protect Konoha's interests, he said, a man holding a chess piece over a table someone had cleared. "It's my duty to remember who lives here," Tsunade said. "And to keep their kitchens from becoming laboratories. You allow a weapon to remain unclaimed," Danzo said, eyes slitting toward Naruto in a way that meant inventory instead of person. "Funny," Naruto said, powering the grin with nothing but bone-deep fatigue. "I feel very claimed." "By whom?" Danzo asked. A man W. Ho believed ownership was always singular. "By us," Sakura said without looking up from bandaging a man's arm. "By me," Tsunade said, sharing credit only because she had chosen to. "And by himself." She lifted her chin. "You're done. Take a seat in a room with a door that locks from the outside. We'll talk after I decide which budget you're returning to me." The masked shinobi who had spoken to Naruto in the fog watched Danzo be removed and then, after the shortest of pauses, flung their mask to the ground with an economy that made the gesture feel less like theater and more like resignation. "We write songs," they said to Naruto. The words tasting like sap and iron. "Sometimes we forget who they're for." Naruto wanted to say something clever and didn't. He said, "Help us tune, because a village needed more hands, not fewer." The masked shinobi blinked behind a face that finally had a face. "All right," they said, and it wasn't acceptance of forgiveness, it was acceptance of work. By evening, Konoha looked like a place that had written a new habit. The biggest plates threw back the sun sloppily and without shame. Children put their mirrors away like toys they loved enough to take care of. The wind corridors collapsed with little sighs as Tamari told them they could rest. Karen found a quiet corner and fell asleep upright with her head on a stack of gauze. Tenten pretended she was cleaning a plate and was absolutely crying into it. Sasuke vanished with the smug ghost of a smile he didn't know he was wearing. Sakura went home only after Iruka put a hand on her shoulder and said 2 words and made them count. Naruto found Hinata on a bench that didn't have a view anyone would brag about. It looked at a patch of wall with sun-bleached laundry and a potted plant that someone had committed to keeping alive. She scooched over like she'd been saving him space all day. They didn't talk at first. The village did it for them. The small clatter of chopsticks, the jingle of a harness buckle. An argument 2 doors over about whose turn it was to sweep the stoop. Naruto sat with his hands limp on his knees and felt the harness's pads tick once, twice, then settle, like the afterimage of a heartbeat. "I was afraid," he said finally, quietly enough to not embarrass the air. "Not of losing. Of breaking what I love to win." Hinata's hands rested in her lap, fingers linked, kn. Uckles nicked from a day of making thread obey. "You didn't," she said. "You let the village help." He laughed a little. "I wanted to be impressive." "You were," she said, blinking as if the argument puzzled her. "You asked for rails." He looked sideways. She was watching the plant, not him. "Stay with me," he said, because saying it once on a tower hadn't emptied his need to say it into the world. "I plan to," she said. And because she was Hinata, she let her shoulder rest against his and didn't make an announcement of it. The sky finished finishing itself. The last of the eclipse's weirdness drained out of the corners. Plates winked like tired stars. Kurama yawned in his bones, the kind of yawn that dares you to interpret it as fondness. "Your chair held," the fox said grudgingly. "I had carpenters," Naruto said, feeling stupidly proud. "Don't get used to miracles," Kurama grumbled. "They turn you lazy." "I'm going to get used to work," Naruto said. "Feels safer." Somewhere far, under a T-stone roof that had been built precisely to let stars ring, a man in white stood very still and pressed 2 fingers to his throat. The vows did not answer. Something like a room he had forgotten the shape of opened in him. He looked at it without stepping in. "Sunborn," Akihara said to the silence, and the word came in one note again, "human." "Next time, bring a chair." In Iron Country, Kato tall, an elder that the thing in the mountain had been addressed with patience and a mirror plate, and the elder grunted as if inconvenience had been replaced with a good story. At the ruined temple, Shio-en folded up a vision that had wanted to shout and laid it in a quiet drawer, her mouth easier now and her eyes exhausted. In Konoha, Tsunade put the last paperweight back on her desk and picked up AP-en like a weapon that tells the truth when you use it correctly. And on a bench in a quiet street, Not high enough to make the wind do anything dramatic. Naruto let his head tip until it touched Hinata's. She didn't pretend to surprise. He didn't pretend not to need the contact. He didn't make a speech. The village breathed. Kuretsu's kitchen table memory hummed like an old house settling. Somewhere behind it all, a doctrine that had assumed kneeling would be easier than carpentry considered the cost of chairs. Naruto's eyes drooped. He slept in the soft, unremarkable way of a person who was tired and safe. He'd run the rooftops in the morning. He wouldn't crack a tile. Chapter 5 End.